Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. It started with a whisper. Not the poetic kind that dances through the trees or the romantic hush between lovers. This one scratched, dry and rasped, like sandpaper dragged across raw skin. It came from room 6, the one that hadn't been rented out in years. Most people in town didn't even remember the Crestwood Inn existed. It sat on the far end of Route 11, shrouded by thick pine trees that clawed at the windows. Once a bustling roadside motel in the 70s, it had rotted quietly into obscurity after a series of strange disappearances that no one wanted to talk about anymore. Then the Warrens bought it. They weren't a couple or a family, just two men, Simon and Ed, who paid in cash, said almost nothing, and kept to themselves. They fixed up the place slowly, methodically, never hired help, never spoke to neighbors, and for a while, no one cared. That changed when the sign flickered to life again, humming in the fog like a threat more than a welcome. Crestwood Inn. Vacancy. The first guest was a trucker. Big guy named Roy came in late, just before midnight. He booked room 2, paid cash, never left. Sheriff Dobbins said Roy probably skipped town. Left his rig parked outside with the keys in the ignition, and everything he owned inside it. His wallet, his phone, even a little Polaroid of a kid taped to the dashboard with the name Eli scrawled in the corner. No one could find him. Then came the others. A traveling nurse, a college couple on a road trip, a woman with a broken arm who just needed to rest. None of them stayed more than a night, but they all left shaken. One woman was found 2 towns over, sitting barefoot in the middle of the road, muttering about something in the walls. Another crashed her car into a ditch and walked 12 miles through the woods before collapsing on someone's porch. None of them ever said the word ghost, but they all had the same look in their eyes, like they'd seen something that hollowed them out from the inside. Then came the journalist. Her name was Eliza Moore. She had the curiosity of a hound and the mouth of someone who didn't scare easy. Her podcast, Buried Noise, had gained traction for digging into forgotten disappearances, cold cases no one else wanted to touch. When she heard about Crestwood Inn, she didn't hesitate. She booked room 6. That room hadn't been touched since the old days. Not even by Simon or Ed. They said it was under renovation, but the truth was simpler. The previous owners had padlocked it, after the Patterson twins vanished inside it, leaving behind only a stuffed rabbit and a trail of muddy footprints that led to the closet, and nowhere else. But Eliza insisted, said she needed authenticity, wanted the full story. She arrived with 3 cameras, 2 mics, a recorder, and a box of batteries. She signed the guest book with a flourish. Eliza Moore, June 2nd, 2025, room 6. The last person to sign before her was from 1989. She checked in at 5:47 p.m. By 6:13, the door to room 6 had shut behind her, and by sunrise her voice was coming through the vents. Simon was the first to hear it. He'd been downstairs in the office, watching grainy security footage when the sound filtered in, like someone speaking underwater, words mangled, tone flat. At first he thought it was the pipes. Then the voice got louder. Don't listen. Don't speak. Don't breathe. He froze. It wasn't the voice that chilled him. It was the pattern. That exact phrase had been heard once before, 12 years ago, when a boy named Theo Price had gotten locked in room 6 during a game of hide and seek. They found him 3 days later, curled into a ball in the bathtub, hands pressed over his ears, lips torn at the corners from where he'd bitten them shut. He never spoke again, but he wrote over and over again on his little chalkboard, "Don't listen. Don't speak. Don't breathe." Simon turned the volume down. The voice kept going. The cameras were useless. They blinked static every time they pointed toward room 6. Ed went up first. He was always the brave one. He knocked. No answer. He unlocked the door slowly, half expecting Eliza to jump out and laugh about scaring them. She wasn't that kind of person, but they hoped. The room was dark. All of her equipment had been ripped apart. Wires hung like intestines from the ceiling. Her laptop had been crushed, as if someone had stepped on it repeatedly. And the bed had no mattress, just springs. Bent and twisted into the shape of something impossible, something with too many arms and no face. But the most disturbing thing wasn't what they found. It was what they didn't. Eliza was gone. No blood, no note, no scream, just her recorder. Still running, sitting in the middle of the floor. Ed picked it up. There were only 5 seconds of audio. Help me. It's wearing my skin. They shut room 6 again. Didn't tell the police. They said she left early. Left everything behind, but people do that sometimes. But the thing is, she didn't leave. Her voice kept coming back every night, saying different things, begging, mocking, crying, and always that one line, whispered like a prayer made from broken teeth, "It's wearing my skin." A week passed. Then 2. Then the phone started ringing. Not the front desk one, the room phones. The ones they never fixed, the ones that had no connection to anything. Every time they answered, there'd be silence, then a click, then breathing. Once, Simon swore he heard his own voice on the line, asking, "Why did you leave me in the dark?" Room 6 became the heart of something, like a wound that wouldn't close. One night, Ed nailed the door shut, bolted it with iron. But the next morning, it was wide open, and inside it was the stuffed rabbit from the Patterson twins. Still damp, still warm. The town started to notice. Not the people, really, just the air. Dogs wouldn't go near the motel. The trees around it began to twist toward the building. And sometimes, at exactly 3:14 a.m., all the lights in the place would flicker in perfect rhythm, like a heartbeat made of electricity. That's when the notes started showing up, under doors, in mailboxes, stuffed into glove compartments, written in blocky, childlike handwriting on torn motel stationery. "I see you." He watches from behind the wall. "Room 6 is open. Come inside." Each note was signed the same way, EM. But the most terrifying note came last Thursday, slipped under the office door. Written in red ink that bled through 3 sheets of paper. "You let me in." And beneath it, a Polaroid. But Ed, sleeping in his bed, he hadn't told anyone about the dreams. Not even Simon. But every night, he dreamed of a woman with no mouth, sitting on the end of his bed, trying to scream. Every night she got closer. Last night, she touched his hand. The Crestwood Inn still stands. Room 6 is still open. And tonight, another name goes in the guest book. Not written by a hand, but carved. Just 3 letters, UOU. Because if you've heard this story, if you've felt that tingling on your neck, if you've suddenly become aware of the silence in your room, then it's already started. Room 6 knows your name. Room 6 remembers your face, and it's waiting. The first time Jack Talbot heard the name Room 6, it was in a late-night bar off County Road 7, muttered by a man too drunk to walk and too scared to sleep. Jack had a habit of chasing broken stories, rumors wrapped in half-truths and laced with fear. He wasn't a journalist like Eliza Moore, but he knew her work. He'd listened to Buried Noise more than once, especially the last episode that cut off mid-sentence. The audio glitch wasn't a glitch. He knew that. There was something underneath the silence. Something waiting. Jack wasn't superstitious, but he wasn't a skeptic either. He believed in what he could see and what he could prove, but lately, the lines between proof and madness had blurred. The man at the bar, teeth chattering as if the room were made of ice, had gripped Jack's wrist and hissed one word: teeth. Not ghosts. Not demons. Just that. Teeth. Jack didn't understand until later. The Crestwood Inn was easy to miss. Jack drove past it twice, even with the GPS barking at him. It was like his eyes slid over it, like the building refused to exist until it wanted to be seen. When it finally came into focus, it looked wrong. Not run down, not haunted, just off. The windows were too dark. The angles of the roof didn't sit right. The air around it buzzed faintly, like static clinging to his skin. The vacancy sign was flickering red, not white, not the usual neon blue, red, deep, throbbing like a pulse. He parked anyway. Simon greeted him at the front desk, a man with hollow eyes and a polite smile that didn't reach them. He didn't ask Jack for ID. Didn't even look surprised when Jack asked for room 6. "I'm sorry," he said, the words stiff, like he hadn't used them in a long time. "That room is unavailable." Jack slid $200 across the counter. Simon didn't touch it. Then Jack leaned in. "I'm here for Eliza." Simon flinched. It was small, but Jack caught it. The name still had power, still left bruises behind. "She's gone," Simon said. "I know," Jack answered. "I'm here to find out where." There was a long silence. Ed came in from the back, taller and paler than Jack expected. He looked like a man who'd forgotten how to rest. When Simon nodded, Ed didn't speak. He just took the money and handed over a key. Room 6. Jack pocketed it without looking. He noticed things as he walked the corridor. The wallpaper near room 4 peeled back like skin. A line of soot crawled across the ceiling and vanished above room 5. And then room 6, its door wasn't like the others. It looked older, thicker, with scratches along the bottom like something had tried to claw its way out. The key turned harder than expected. The lock groaned. Inside, the air felt dense, heavy like breathing in underwater. Dust floated, but it didn't fall. It just hovered. Jack set down his bag and did what he always did, scanned, recorded, observed. He turned on his recorder and spoke. "June 8th, Crestwood Inn, room 6. Air is thick. Lights flicker every 17 seconds. Smells like copper and something sweeter. Decay, maybe. Feels like I'm being watched." He moved to the closet. It was already open. Nothing inside but a cracked mirror propped against the back wall. The glass wasn't reflective. It was absorbent. It didn't show his face. It showed the room, but without him in it. He leaned closer. The surface rippled. And then he saw teeth. Not a mouth, just teeth. Hundreds of them. Flat, wide, and polished like mirrors. They moved as if chewing, though there was no jaw. Just a wall of reflection and 1,000 grinding edges. He stumbled back. The mirror showed his reflection now. But his eyes were missing. Jack blinked, shook his head. The image returned to normal. That night, he didn't sleep. He tried, but the walls groaned, and the floorboards under the bed moved as if someone were crawling beneath them. He heard whispers. Never loud enough to understand, but rhythmic, like a chant. And once, just after 3 a.m., he heard someone dragging their nails across the door. Slow, scraping. Then a soft knock, followed by breathless, childlike laughter. He didn't open it. Instead, he pressed his recorder against the floorboards and listened. There were voices beneath the floor, not one, many, crying. Some singing. Some repeating names. Then his own voice, "You let me in." Jack froze. He hadn't said that. Not yet. But the recorder said otherwise. He played it back. Static. Then the sound of something wet, like someone chewing a mouthful of glass. And then again, "You let me in." He checked the mirror. His eyes were there, but the reflection was smiling. He wasn't. Morning came like a mercy killing. Jack rushed to the front desk, demanding answers. But Ed was gone, and Simon looked worse than ever. Like a man being slowly hollowed out. Jack slammed his recorder on the counter. "What is this place?" Simon looked at the device like it was a bomb. "You shouldn't have gone in," he said. "Room 6 doesn't want stories. It wants parts." "What does that mean?" Jack asked. Simon looked up, and his eyes were wet. "Have you looked in the mirror yet?" Jack paused. Simon whispered, "That's not your reflection anymore." Jack left. He needed air. He needed noise. He needed something alive. He drove to the next town, called everyone he knew. No signal, no internet. Every road seemed to loop back to the inn, no matter how far he drove. At 7 p.m., he pulled over to a gas station, abandoned, and tried his recorder again. He pressed play. It didn't play the night's audio. It played something else. Eliza's voice. "Don't listen." Don't speak, don't breathe. Then his own voice, whispering he's already inside. He dropped the recorder, left it on the pavement, drove back to Crestwood without thinking. Because in the mirror that morning, something had changed. His teeth, they weren't his, they were polished, shimmering, perfect, too perfect, and when he smiled, they smiled back. But the smile kept going. Even after he stopped, he checked again. No mistake. The mirror wasn't showing the room anymore. It was showing them. The ones before him. The ones who came and stayed. The ones still whispering through vents and floorboards and mirrors. And all of them were smiling. Room 6 hadn't let them leave. It had warned them, and now it was trying him on. Jack didn't remember falling asleep, only that he woke up to silence, so complete it rang in his ears. Room 6 was dark again, the kind of darkness that felt alive. Not from the absence of light, but from the weight of something watching. His heart hammered against his ribs, as if it wanted to leave before he did. He sat up slowly, expecting to see his reflection watching from the mirror across the room. But it wasn't there. The mirror was blank again, just the room, no Jack, no movement, no sound. He whispered, "What do you want?" And something whispered back, directly behind his ear, more. Jack leapt from the bed, hand flying to his neck, but there was nothing there. Only the rustle of stale air, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. He scanned the room. Everything looked the same, yet wrong. His bag had been unzipped. His notes scattered across the floor. His recorder, now crushed under the leg of the chair, still blinked red. Still recording. He picked it up, hand trembling. Pressed play. His own voice came through, but it was speaking words he didn't remember saying. "I see them when I blink. I feel them when I breathe. They're behind the walls. They don't sleep. They remember my name." The voice sounded like him, but wasn't him. It was slower, drawn out, like someone pulling words through a meat grinder. Then a sound, a breath. Deep, wet, and close. He turned to the wall. There was a bulge in the wallpaper, about chest height. Subtle, but it pulsed. Jack stepped closer, pressing his hand to it. It was warm. Beneath the paper, something shifted, slid, like wet skin on plaster. And then he felt it. A puff of breath against his palm, then fingers. He stumbled back, heart trying to crawl up his throat. The bulge receded instantly, leaving no sign it had ever been there. But the breath lingered. Jack didn't believe in haunted places. He believed in trauma, in madness, in the human brain cracking under pressure. But this wasn't madness. He wasn't unraveling. The room was. He fled downstairs, barefoot and wild-eyed, nearly colliding with Simon in the hallway. For a moment, Jack was ready to scream, to demand answers again, to shake the truth loose from the man's dead stare. But Simon spoke first. "Did you open the closet?" he asked. Jack paused. "No." Simon blinked. "Good? That's not a closet anymore." Jack wanted to ask what it was then, but something in Simon's voice made him stop. It wasn't fear, it was grief. Back in the lobby, Ed was waiting. He looked worse than yesterday, skin sagging, lips pale, fingers twitching like he couldn't stop them from moving. "She's not gone," Ed said. "Eliza." Jack stepped closer. Ed nodded. "She's somewhere between. Room sips, it doesn't kill. It keeps. It copies. It breaks you until you can't tell if you're the echo or the voice." Jack swallowed. "So how do I get her back?" "You don't." Jack stared at him. "There has to be something." Ed leaned forward, whispering so low it hurt to hear. "She left something behind. A way out. Maybe. But it's in the crawl space behind the wall. And it only shows up when the room breathes." "What does that mean?" "You'll know it when you hear it." Jack didn't want to go back. Every part of his body screamed to leave, to burn the place down and never look back. But he couldn't. Not after what he saw. Not after what he heard. Eliza's voice, warped and fractured as it was, had called to him. Back in room 6, the air was heavier than before, like walking into a storm. He shut the door behind him and waited, and then it started. A deep inhale, from somewhere inside the walls. like the whole room was filling its lungs. The wallpaper bulged again, but higher this time, right above the bed. Jack climbed up, fingers tracing the seam where the paper fluttered like it was breathing. He pulled, tearing it open in one clean rip. Behind it was not drywall. It was cloth, stretched tight over wood, old, brittle cloth that had been stapled crudely. Behind it, something moved. He pressed his ear to the surface. A heartbeat, but not his. With shaking fingers, he peeled it away, revealing a narrow space no wider than his shoulders. A tunnel. A crawl space that hadn't been in any blueprint. He grabbed his flashlight and climbed in. The walls were made of splintered wood, slick with some kind of viscous grime. The air smelled like rust and rot, and every few feet he saw carvings, scratches, names etched into the beams. "Help me, it's not me. She's still here." And one that made his blood go cold, Jack Talbot. He hadn't written it, but it was there. He kept crawling. The deeper he went, the colder it got. His flashlight flickered, the beam catching movement ahead. A flicker of cloth. Hair. He sped up, heart thundering in his ears. Then he saw her, Eliza, curled in the farthest corner of the crawl space, eyes wide open, lips parted, but silent. Her skin was pale, too pale, and her hair was matted to her forehead. Jack reached for her. Eliza. She didn't move. He touched her shoulder. She blinked. "Don't," she started. And then the tunnel exhaled. The breath was so strong it knocked Jack backward, slamming his head against the wood. The flashlight dropped. Roll. Went out. In the dark, he heard her voice again, but this time it came from the opposite direction. Another Eliza. Laughing. "I told you not to come." He turned, panic setting in, crawled forward, forward, forward. But the tunnel had changed. The wood warped beneath his hands. The grime thickened. The names on the walls blood ink like open wounds. And then silence. He emerged back into room 6, gasping, covered in filth. He looked back. No tunnel. No opening. Just the wall. The room had sealed itself. He turned to the mirror. There were 2 reflections now. Both of him, but only one smiled. And the one that smiled had mirror teeth. Jack didn't leave room 6 after crawling out of that shifting, stinking tunnel. He couldn't. His legs would have moved if they still belonged to him. But something in that space, in the breath behind the wall, had latched onto him. A quiet grip, slow and spreading. It wasn't paralysis. It was something worse, a choice made for him before he knew it existed. He sat on the edge of the ruined bed, shirt soaked through, grime coating his arms. Eliza's voice, still whispering from nowhere and everywhere. He didn't know if he had pulled her out of that tunnel, or if he had left her behind again. Or worse, if he had never found her at all. The mind inside room 6 didn't work the same. It folded memories like paper, turned time inside out, gave you answers before questions. Jack's thoughts were spinning, looping, sinking like stones in deep water. Then the sound started again. At first, he thought it was the pipes. A soft groan from the wall, like the building stretching its bones. But it grew louder, rhythmic, unnatural, like something crawling. Not scuttling, not the quick scratch of mice or roaches. No, this sound was slow, deliberate, flesh dragging across wood. Claws catching every few inches. Breath whistling through gaps that shouldn't exist. It was in the walls. Jack backed away from the bed. The mirror flickered again. His reflection blinked, but he hadn't. He moved toward it, watching the image carefully. There it was again, the smile. Not a grin, a leer. The teeth glinted, perfect, square, mirror bright, not his. He covered his mouth with one hand. The reflection did not. Then the noise came louder, not from the mirror, from the vents. The floor. The ceiling. It surrounded him. There was something in the motel. In the structure. Not haunting it, not floating like some misunderstood spirit. It was the place. Like mold growing between walls. Like a parasite spreading in rot. Jack ran, out of room 6. Down the hall he passed doors that were suddenly all open. Room 2, empty but wet. The wallpaper soaked through like someone had bathed inside the walls. Room 4, smeared with something thick and dark along the floor, dragged in long streaks toward the bathroom. Room 5, filled with feathers. Dozens of black birds, frozen mid-motion, beaks shattered, wings contorted in ways that defied biology. And every room whispered. Every single one. Different voices, same cadence. Like a choir reciting something in reverse. He burst into the lobby. Simon wasn't there. The front door was. He reached for the handle and felt teeth. Not a doorknob. Teeth. Human. Wet. Grinning. He recoiled, bile rising in his throat. The door dissolved in front of him, melting into a flat sheet of wallpaper as if it had never existed. Just part of the wall. Just another trick. He turned, panting. Ed was standing there. His face was wrong. Slack on one side, asymmetrical, as if gravity had chosen favorites. His eyes were sunken, skin stretched. He didn't blink. "You tried to open the door," Ed said. Jack's voice was thin. "What's happening?" Ed's jaw clicked. "It's listening." "What is?" Ed tilted his head. "The sound." Jack took a step back. "What sound?" "You'll hear it soon." Ed took a step forward. "It's hungry now. You move through it. That's how it finds you. I don't understand. It doesn't want understanding. It wants pieces. Of me. Of you. Your voice. Your eyes. Your memory. It collects people the way rooms collect dust. It waits until you stop being yourself, then keeps the shell." Jack's knees buckled. "How do I stop it?" Ed didn't answer, because the sound began again. Not in the walls, not in the ceiling, but inside Jack. It started in his ears. A pressure, then a tone low and bone deep. His teeth vibrated. His spine hummed. The world tilted. Then the crawling returned. But this time it wasn't outside. It was inside his head. He screamed. Ed lunged, gripping his shoulders.
"Listen to me! You have to drown it! What? Your thoughts!"
The sound feeds on gaps, on silence, on stillness. That's where it climbs through. Jack shook his head violently. "How do I drown sound?" "Noise," Ed hissed. "Keep talking. Keep thinking. Keep remembering who you are. Don't give it room." Jack tried. He spoke aloud. His name, his birthday, the smell of his mother's kitchen, the sound of tires on gravel at summer camp. But it was fading. The sound inside him grew. It became words. "Jack, come back." It was his mother's voice. Then his father's. Then Elise's. "Jack," they all said in that same horrible, breathless tone. "Come back. We miss you. You forgot. You forgot. You forgot." He felt his fingers going numb. His vision pulsed at the edges. His reflection. Where was his reflection? He looked around. There were mirrors everywhere now, lining the walls. None of them matched his movements. One Jack wept. Another screamed. One simply bled from the mouth, black and slow like ink. Only one reflection was still, and it smiled. Ed grabbed Jack by the neck and shoved him backward. "You're not him yet." They fell, slamming into the check-in desk. The sound receded for a breath. Jack gasped. "You have minutes," Ed whispered. "Maybe less." Jack's eyes darted around. There has to be something. A way to stop it. A way to kill it. Ed laughed, short and sharp. "You think it's a ghost. This place isn't haunted. It's possessed. But not by something dead. It's alive." Jack clung to that word. "Alive." Ed nodded slowly. "And you're inside its lungs." Silence fell again. Then, from every vent, every crack in the building, came a wet inhale. Then the sound started to crawl again. And this time, it wasn't coming toward him. It was waiting. Jack whispered into the dark, "What happens if it finishes crawling?" Ed didn't respond, because Ed was already gone. His body still stood, eyes wide, mouth open, but he was empty. A shell, not even breathing. From the shadows behind him, a voice whispered in Jack's own cadence, "Then you forget you were ever real." The first thing Jack noticed was the smell. Not rot or dust or mildew. Those would have made sense. This was different. Sweet, cloying wrong, like fruit left in a hot car. Like something that had once been alive, then tried to pretend it still was. It filled the air after Ed stopped breathing. Or maybe Ed had stopped breathing because the smell had arrived. Jack didn't know anymore. His mind had begun to split in thin, hairline fractures. He could feel it, memories slipping like fingers off a wet ledge, names softening around the edges, facts rearranging themselves into shapes that didn't feel quite human. He backed away from Ed's frozen body. The man hadn't collapsed. He hadn't turned to ash or screamed or wept. He had just stopped, as if someone had unplugged him and walked away. His mouth remained slightly open, as though waiting to inhale again. But the breath never came. His eyes stayed wide, too wide, the whites beginning to film over. It looked like he had seen something just before the end. Not fear, not pain, but recognition. Jack didn't want to know what he had recognized. Behind him, the vents rattled. The sound was back. Soft at first, like someone whispering into cotton. But then it thickened, grew. Words shaped themselves inside it. Familiar, too familiar, Jack had said. "Hey, Jack, it's me." Eliza's voice, or something that wore it. Jack spun, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't keep the recorder steady. It didn't matter. The thing didn't care about being recorded. It already was. The voice came again. "Don't be scared. I found a way out." His skin crawled. That was the exact phrase Eliza had used in a voicemail 3 years ago, after her first big breakthrough. He remembered it clearly because it had come at 2 a.m., and she'd sounded breathless, excited, alive. But now that same voice came through the vents. Slower, empty, mimicked. It remembered her. The motel had a memory. It didn't just echo voices, it dissected them, rebuilt them, used them like tools. Jack, the voice repeated, closer now. "It's okay. We're okay. Just come back to the room." He closed his eyes, tried to focus on something solid. The floor under his feet. The feeling of the desk edge pressing against his thigh. His heartbeat. The only thing left that still felt like his. He wasn't sure how long it would stay that way. Then the voice changed. Not Eliza anymore. His mother. "You left me, sweetheart." Jack flinched. "You said you'd be back. Do you remember? You were 6. You were crying. I waited for you by the stairs." He had, once, after the divorce. He'd locked himself in the back seat of his dad's car and refused to come out. His mother had stood in the doorway for hours. That memory wasn't in any recording. No podcast. No social media. That memory was his alone. "How do you know that?" he whispered. The voice responded immediately, gently, "Because I was there. I remember all the pieces you left behind. You give them to me every time you listen." And just like that, he understood something terrible. This thing didn't hunt you like a beast. It fed on the act of attention. It waited for your thoughts to land on the wrong thing, a sound, a shadow, a familiar word. And once you noticed it, once you truly heard it, it began to eat, not fast, not messy, but slowly, in layers. Like peeling fruit with a dull knife, piece by piece. It used recognition as the key. Jack turned and ran. Not back to room 6, not toward Ed. He sprinted down the side hallway, past the doors that whispered his name. Past the lobby that had lost all color. He pushed through the emergency exit and into the back stairwell. No alarms. Of course there weren't. Nothing here wanted to keep him out. He pounded down the stairs, gasping, until he found the basement. The door was open. Inside was nothing like the upstairs. No clean lines or dusty furniture, just earth. Mud. Piping that wet black water. And in the center, an old, rusted water tank, half buried in the soil, covered in claw marks and old tape. He stepped inside. The smell was strongest here, like open mouths. Like meat left under heat lamps. He turned on his flashlight and stopped breathing. Taped to the side of the tank was a photo of him, but not him now. Not how he looked walking into this place. The man in the photo was thinner, his eyes dull, his arms stretched like they'd been pulled too far. He wore Jack's clothes, Jack's necklace, but he wasn't Jack, not really. On the back of the photo, scrawled in crooked marker, "Do you remember who you are yet?" Behind him, the voice whispered again. Not Eliza, not his mother. This time it was him. Jack, his own voice croaked. "You're almost done." Just a few more pieces. I need your name. I need your walk. I need the way you think about falling asleep. Jack dropped the photo and screamed.
I'm still me!
The voice laughed. You were. A light flickered to his left. A mirror, covered in grime and cracked down the middle, revealed a silhouette behind him. Thin, smiling, with mirror teeth. It was his body, moving without him. It stepped forward, matching his every move half a second before he made it. Jack backed into the wall, eyes wide. What are you? He gasped. The thing tilted its head. I'm what you leave behind when you forget which thoughts are yours. Then it reached up, slowly, and peeled something off its face. A mask. No, not a mask. Skin. His skin. Underneath was the same smile. No lips. Just teeth, hundreds of them, polished and cold. I've borrowed your voice. It whispered. Now I want your silence. And Jack understood then, as the sound behind his ears swelled, as the walls began to groan again. As the ground beneath his feet pulsed like a heartbeat, there was no leaving the Crestwood Inn. There was only replacing. Something had borrowed his reflection. Something had mimicked his voice. Now it wanted the rest, and it was almost done. Jack didn't scream. Not because he didn't want to, but because the thing wearing his voice would have echoed it back louder, stronger, more convincing. Instead, he backed deeper into the basement, pressing his spine against cold concrete. Eyes locked on the figure that looked like him, and yet felt utterly alien. The thing moved in short, jerky twitches, as though it was still figuring out how to wear him properly. Like a child trying on an adult's coat, except the coat was skin, and the child wasn't human. The creature raised its hand, mimicking Jack's own shaky gesture, then spoke in a perfect match of his voice, tone, even hesitation. Don't run, it said. I'll only catch you slower. It grinned wider. Jack bolted, not up the stairs, but sideways through a narrow arch of crumbled stone that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. His flashlight flickered with every step, the beam sputtering in rhythm with his panicked breath. The corridor narrowed, sloping downward. The air got thicker, heavy with mildew and static, and each footfall felt like it echoed too many times, like someone was chasing him half a step behind, but never close enough to see. Then came the hum. Low at first, like an old refrigerator, but quickly evolving into a deep vibration that made Jack's bones ache. It wasn't sound in the traditional sense. It was wrong. Like someone trying to imitate sound without understanding how it worked. It pulsed through the stone around him, through his teeth, into his thoughts. The words in his mind jumbled, his memories skipped, and for a terrifying few seconds, Jack forgot what he was running from. Then he saw it. A door. No frame. No knob. Just a rectangle etched into the wall, marked by claw scratches and old nail heads. But it was his room. Room 6. The number etched crudely into the top corner with what looked like a fork. He recognized the dents on the wood, the faint smear of blood beneath where the handle used to be. This wasn't a room like Room 6. This was Room 6. Somehow, impossibly, buried beneath the Crestwood Inn was a copy. Jack touched the door and it pulsed under his fingertips, like something breathing just behind the wood. He didn't want to open it. Every part of him screamed to turn around, to find a way back up, to get above ground, into sunlight, into noise. But something deeper, something colder, pushed him forward. He opened the door. Inside was silence. Not absence of sound, true silence. The kind that swallows your breath, kills your thoughts, scrapes your identity down to the bone. The room was identical to the one upstairs. Same bed, same cracked mirror, same humming vent, but darker. Not just less light, less reality. As if it existed one layer beneath the world he knew. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him. He didn't need to look to know it had vanished. He was in the room now, the real Room 6, not the one upstairs. That one was just bait. This was the throat. The bed creaked as he passed it. The sheets were wet. Sticky. Something had been lying there recently. something that breathed just loud enough to pretend to be asleep. The mirror on the wall was clean, and it was already watching him. This time his reflection didn't copy his movements. It stood still, smiling, and then, as Jack stepped closer, it moved on its own. It leaned forward, and said in his voice, "You don't belong here." Jack clenched his fists. "You stole her." The reflection tilted its head. "No, she gave herself. That's a lie." "No, Jack. That's the trade. The room doesn't take. It waits. You hear the breath, you follow it. You listen too long, and the door opens." The reflection stepped sideways, revealing something behind it. Another door. This one was different. Tall, narrow, wrapped in chains that pulsed like veins. It shouldn't have fit in the space. It was bigger than the wall, but somehow it was there, imposing, wrong, hungry. Jack's reflection gestured toward it. "She's behind there. What's left of her." "Open it," Jack said. The smile faded. "You're not ready." Jack stepped closer. "Then make me." The room inhaled, not just the air, him, his memories, his balance, his understanding of direction. The floor dipped. The lights bent. He stumbled, landed hard on his knees, and when he looked up, the mirror had changed again. It showed Eliza. Not how she looked before. Her eyes were missing, just dark holes. Her mouth moved, but her voice came through the vent. "Jack," it whispered. "It's not the room. It's what waits beneath it." He turned to the floor. Beneath the rotting carpet was a seam. Thin, hidden. He tore it open with trembling fingers, revealing a square panel of rotted wood. He pulled it back. There was no floor beneath it, just a pit, endless, black, breathing, and something rising. Jack scrambled back his fingers. Long, wrong, too many joints, gripped the edge of the hole. Then a hand, then another, and between them, a face began to lift. No eyes, no nose, just teeth. It was building itself, from the voices, from the borrowed faces, from him. The thing spoke in a dozen voices. His, Eliza's, Ed's, his mother's, the crying boy from the hallway, the trucker who never left. All layered. All wrong, we are the voice behind the breath. Jack stared into its growing face. "You're not me." The creature paused, then smiled wider. "Not yet." And with that, it opened its mouth, not to speak, but to inhale. And Jack felt himself slipping again. Not his body, his thoughts. The thing was swallowing his memories. And somewhere behind the chained door, Eliza screamed. Jack didn't hesitate. He dove for the door with the chains before he had time to consider what the consequences might be. Eliza's scream wasn't muffled. It was raw, wild. Alive. It clawed its way through the air like something that couldn't afford to be ignored. He hit the surface of the door hard, shoulder first, the chains cold and slick beneath his hands. They pulsed once, then held. Alive, just like everything else in this place. The door wasn't locked. It wasn't even latched. It was waiting. Behind him, the thing from the pit continued to rise, bones cracking, limbs adjusting, teeth splitting and reforming. It was using pieces from everything it had swallowed: laughter, screams, lullabies, memories it hadn't earned. And it was building something terrible from them. Jack threw his full weight into the door. The chains uncoiled like vines slipping from a branch. They didn't clatter. They hissed. The door yawned inward, too slowly, as though the space on the other side wasn't ready to receive light. Jack stepped through anyway, because there was no other direction. There never had been. The space beyond wasn't a room. It was outside, but not any outside Jack had known. No sky, no ground. Just a long hallway of doors suspended in air that moved like fog underwater. Each door was different. Some cracked open, others nailed shut. Some glowing faintly, others bleeding. They stretched into darkness, into impossible distance, curving in ways that made Jack's eyes hurt to follow. This wasn't beneath the Crestwood Inn. This was inside it. Inside what it had become. And from somewhere deep in the haze, Eliza screamed again. He ran. His boots hit solid nothing, just enough to keep him upright. The hallway twisted with every few steps. Doors opened just enough to watch him pass. He saw things, reflections of himself with holes where their faces should be, children curled in corners humming out of two nursery rhymes, one room where the air inside flickered like a candle underwater, revealing outlines of dozens of people suspended upside down, not moving, not aging, just waiting. He found her by the sixth screen, room 217. The door was covered in photographs, all pinned with broken safety pins, photos of Eliza, but not ones Jack had ever seen. These were intimate, personal. Her as a child, her asleep on a train, her brushing her teeth. Some weren't even possible. One showed her in the motel. This motel. Wearing clothes she'd never owned, standing in a hallway that didn't exist. Jack tore them off and opened the door. Inside, Eliza sat in a chair, not tied, just still. Her eyes were glazed over, her face waxy. A voice whispered constantly from a speaker hanging above her, a looped recording. "You're not real. You were never real. They made you. They forgot you. No one said your name. No one came back." The speaker repeated it again and again, as though drilling it into her. Jack rushed forward and tore it from the ceiling. The voice didn't stop. It just moved. Now whispering from the floorboards, the walls, the air. He knelt in front of her. "Eliza," he whispered. She blinked once. Slowly. Then again her lips parted. "I forgot what my voice sounds like," she said. "I've been here so long." Jack took her hand. It was cold but not dead. Still hers. "You're not done," he said. She looked up at him, eyes unfocused. "Jack, yeah, I'm here." Her face crumpled, not from joy but pain. "Then it's too late." "No," Jack said. But behind him, the door groaned. The thing from the pit had followed. Except now, it was shaped like him. Perfectly. Except the eyes, too deep, too still. And the voice that came out of its mouth wasn't just his. It was every voice he'd ever heard. Layered. Offbeat. Wrong. "You opened the real door," it said. Jack stood, putting himself between Eliza and the thing. "She's not yours. She is now. Like you will be. Like every name forgotten here." Jack scanned the room. There were no windows. No mirrors. No vents. No exits. Except back the way he came. But the thing blocked that way. And it was still growing. Its body stretched toward the ceiling, sprouting new mouths, new ears, wet eyes that blinked sideways. Jack had never seen anything more deliberate. It wasn't wild. It wasn't chaotic. It was calculated. A collector. A mimic. A thief of what made people themselves. "Eliza," he said, still watching the creature. "You have to remember something. Anything. Just say it." She trembled. I don't know what's mine." The thing smiled. Jack stepped closer. "Yes, you do. The first episode. You named it. You picked the title. You made people listen. You exist." The creature shivered at the word. It didn't like that. Eliza looked at Jack. "Buried noise." "Say it louder." She blinked, breath shallow. "Buried noise." The air bent. The hallway outside twisted with a loud creak, as if the walls themselves were recoiling. The creature paused mid-step, its chest convulsing, mouth stretching wider, as if something had cracked inside it. Jack understood. "Names," he whispered. "It steals when we forget. So we fight it by remembering." He turned back to Eliza. "What's your middle name?" She frowned. "Marie. First pet. Charlie. Your first story." She smiled faintly. "The girl who disappeared in the mirror. I thought I made it up. You didn't. You remembered it." The room began to shudder. Dust fell from nowhere. Cracks rippled through the floor. The photographs on the door burned one by one. The creature began to scream, a real sound this time. Raw, shrill. Not mimicked, not borrowed. Its own voice. Because it was dying, or shrinking. Every memory spoken aloud peeled something off it. A piece of its skin. A layer of stolen thought. Its body flickered now, turning to smoke, then solid, then smoke again. Jack turned to it. "My name is Jack Talbot. I'm real, and you can't have me." The thing bared its teeth, hundreds of them, mirror, sharp and gleaming. But it didn't lunge, it retreated, because it couldn't feed on the remembered, only the forgotten. And for now, Jack remembered everything. The walls didn't break, they breathed. Jack could feel it the moment the creature recoiled, not in a physical collapse, but in a drawing inward, like a tide pulling back before the wave. The pressure in the room shifted, a low pop behind his ears like changing altitude, and the air turned heavier, thicker, as if the building itself had taken notice of what he'd just done. Saying his name, saying her name, fighting back, that wasn't supposed to happen. The Crestwood Inn had never been challenged before. Jack turned to Eliza, who was still trembling, her body shedding the slow glaze of forgetfulness, like someone waking from a dream they hadn't known they were dreaming. She blinked hard, squeezing his hand with a force that said she was real and terrified and furious that something had dared to make her forget that. Then the floor beneath them moved. It didn't shake or break, it shuffled, like something beneath the surface had shifted positions. The boards groaned, not from pressure, but from intention, as if the place was considering what to do next. "We can't stay here," Jack said, pulling her up. Eliza nodded, wobbly at first, but finding her footing. "It won't let us leave." "I'm not asking its permission." But when Jack yanked open the door to room 217, the hallway was gone, not altered, not twisted, gone. In its place was a corridor of absolute black, velvety, deep and alive. No doors, no lights, just a straight, endless tunnel that breathed cold against their faces. The edges pulsed faintly, like the interior of a living throat. It smelled like rainwater on concrete and the faint metallic tang of blood. Eliza stepped closer. It moved everything. Jack stared into the dark. "It's swallowing its own halls." "Then why give us a path?" she whispered. Jack answered without looking away. "Because it wants us to take it." They stepped in together. The blackness didn't just surround them. It crawled. With every step, the ground behind them disappeared, consumed, as if the path existed only while they walked it. Jack could feel it watching, not from behind or ahead, but within. Every thought he had was accompanied by a second one, quieter, repeating the same words back in his voice, but slower, like an echo that hadn't decided if it wanted to be helpful or mocking. After the third minute, Eliza whispered, "I don't know if we're going forward." Jack stopped walking. She was right. There was no frame of reference, no sound, no walls to brush against. Just the illusion of movement and a trail of faint breath against their necks. "We could have been standing still this whole time," she said. Or worse, Jack thought. They could be walking in place while the place moved around them. Then a door appeared. No noise, no flash. It was just there, inches from his face, ancient and rotted, with no handle. A faint, slow knock came from the other side, once, twice. Then silence. Jack reached out, resting his palm against the wood. It was warm. "Do we open it?" Eliza asked. "We don't have a choice." "Not really." The door didn't resist. It opened into another hallway, but this one was normal. Lit with humming bulbs overhead, clean linoleum underfoot, a vending machine humming down at the end. Like a hospital corridor, Jack felt his stomach twist. "Where is this?" Eliza whispered. "I think," Jack's voice caught. "This is a memory. The hallway wasn't part of the motel. He'd been here before. Long ago." He moved forward slowly, and the light flickered. At the far end, a small boy sat alone on a bench, feet dangling. Jack's throat tightened. "That's me." Eliza stood still. "How?" He approached carefully. The boy didn't look up. He was staring at his hands, shoulders hunched. The walls around him weren't humming anymore. They were whispering, faint, constant, like wind curling through grass. The boy muttered something. Jack crouched beside him. "What are you waiting for?" he asked. The boy didn't look at him. "They forgot me," the boy whispered. "I asked them not to, but they did." Jack's stomach twisted. He remembered this now. His parents had been arguing, loud enough that the front desk heard. The hospital made him sit in the hallway while they sorted out custody paperwork. 4 hours alone, just waiting. "They didn't mean to," Jack said softly. The boy turned his head slightly, eyes black as pitch. "They always forget." Suddenly, the walls groaned, and the boy's skin cracked down the middle. Eliza shouted, "Jack!" Too late. The boy unfolded, peeling back like a paper doll. Inside wasn't flesh, just a flat, stretching blackness filled with mouths. A dozen tiny mouths, all shaped like his, screaming in different tones. At different speeds, repeating words from his childhood. "I'm still here. Why won't you come back? You said you'd pick me up." The thing lunged. Jack grabbed Eliza and bolted down the hall. Behind them, the blackness surged like a wave. The hospital lights exploded one by one, plunging the corridor into pulsing red light. The vending machine at the end began spitting cans into the air, glass cracking around them. The whispers intensified into a chant of Jack's name. They hit the exit door just as the wave reached them. Light again. Another hallway, but this one smelled like the motel. Crestwood. Eliza panted. "It's pulling your memories. It's turning them into traps." Jack nodded, breathless. "It's how it builds. It stitches people together from what they forget." Eliza backed against the wall. "It's trying to unmake you, Jack." He turned, furious. "Then we remake me." "How?" "By remembering everything it wants me to forget. By forcing it to carry who I am." Behind them, the floor cracked open. Something climbed through. A shape. Not yet formed. But it was wearing his father's voice now. A voice he hadn't heard in years. Saying the thing that had hurt most when he was a boy: "I didn't want you." Jack clenched his fists. His jaw trembled, but he stood still. "No," he said. The shape paused. "I remember the truth. You did want me. You just didn't know how to be someone who stayed. That's not my shame. That's yours." The shape hissed, stumbled. Eliza stepped beside him. "Keep going." Jack looked into the growing face of the thing. The Crestwood's twisted child of echoes and lies, and said, "My name is Jack Talbot. I was born July 19th. My mother's name is Rachel. I built treehouses with no nails when I was 10. I kissed Eliza in college, and thought about it for 2 years before telling her. I remember everything." The creature screamed, 1,000 shrieking mouths, and burst, black smoke evaporating into the hallway. Jack turned. Another door was waiting. Plain. Wooden. The number burned into it, 6. Eliza looked at him. "Is this the last one?" Jack stared. "No, this is the first." Jack stared at the door marked 6. And for the first time since stepping foot into the Crestwood Inn, he felt something heavier than fear. Recognition. Not just of the number or the shape of the door or the smooth grain of the wood beneath his palm. It was deeper, older. Like this door had always existed, long before the motel was built around it, long before his name was ever carved into guest ledgers or whispered through vents. This wasn't a copy. This wasn't a memory twisted into shape by the thing living in the walls. This was the first one, the one that had started all of it. The original mouth the motel had been built around. The seed. Eliza stepped up beside him, quiet, her breath shallow. She was pale, but steady. She had survived her own unmaking, clawed her way back from wherever the Crestwood had dragged her. That kind of resilience didn't come from willpower alone. It came from knowing who you are, even when everything around you tries to tell you otherwise. And right now, she looked at the door like she knew, even without words, that going through it meant either an end or a final beginning. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No," Jack said, voice flat. "But I've never been, and I'm still here." He turned the knob. It didn't creak. It didn't groan. It sighed. Like a pressure valve being released. Like a long breath exhaled after years of holding still. The door swung open without resistance. Beyond it was a motel room. Plain. Beige walls, dull carpet, the standard layout: bed to the left, desk to the right, mirror above it. Lamp on, buzzing slightly. No blood. No distortions. Just normal. But Jack didn't trust it for a second. They stepped inside together. The moment both feet crossed the threshold, the door snapped shut. No latch. No lock. Just the sound of finality. Eliza flinched but didn't look back. Something about the room was watching, not through the mirror. Not through the vent, but through the space. Jack felt it in the corners, in the pauses between breaths, in the way the light from the lamp didn't reach the far wall quite right, like distance had been tampered with. And then the room spoke. Not aloud, not through voice, but through memory. Jack blinked, and he was 7 years old, standing at the top of the stairs in his childhood home, watching his father drive away without saying goodbye. The air smelled like cigarette smoke and rain. He could feel the sharp edge of the banister under his fingers. He blinked again. Now he was 12, hiding in the school bathroom, pretending not to cry after someone slipped a cruel note in his locker. Nanoning wal di note het nef while you mari gorn. Again. He was 20. Sitting outside Eliza's dorm, clutching the apology letter he never had the nerve to give her. Memory after memory surged through him. Not just painful ones, not just fear or regret, but the kind that left marks. The kind that formed him, line by line, moment by moment. And then he saw himself, not a reflection, a figure, sitting in the chair by the desk, the version of Jack who never left the motel. Hollow-eyed, skin slack, wearing his clothes, aged slightly, movements too slow to be natural. Jack stepped closer. The figure looked up. You should have left, it said. I couldn't. You had the chance. You were never me. The thing smiled. No. I'm what's left when you give the motel what it wants. What does it want? The grin widened. It wants permanence. It wants memory that never fades. And it can't make anything on its own. So it takes. You gave it your grief, your regret, your voice. I'm taking it back. You already did, it said. But that doesn't close the door. You think saying your name, holding on to the truth, protects you. But you walked through the first door. You came here on purpose. Jack hesitated. Why? The thing leaned forward, and when it spoke again, it wasn't using his voice. It was using Eliza's. You were always going to end up here, Jack. The walls rippled. The mirror cracked down the middle. Eliza stepped forward. Stop trying to confuse him. The thing turned to her. I'm not trying to confuse him. I'm reminding him. This place was always a part of him. You just helped him find it. Jack spun to Eliza, eyes wide. That's not true. She didn't answer right away. She was staring at the bed. Jack followed her gaze. There was a small tape recorder resting on the pillow. Same model Eliza had used for her podcast. It was playing. Jack stepped closer, picked it up. His own voice came through the tiny speaker, words he didn't remember saying. This is the part where I stop being afraid. This is the part where I become what the room needs me to be. He dropped it. What is this? He hissed. The figure smiled again. This is what you forgot. You came here before, a long time ago, and you left a part of yourself behind. Eliza shook her head. No, that's not right. But she didn't sound certain. Jack's mind spiraled. Flashes of dreams he couldn't place, of waking up in unfamiliar rooms, of whispers that followed him from town to town, of always looking for something. A mystery that led him to Crestwood Inn. But what if it hadn't? What if Crestwood followed him? What if he was never the first guest? What if he was the original piece? He backed away from the bed. No. The lights flickered. The floor split beneath the mirror. That awful breath began again. Hot, sour, cavernous. Eliza grabbed his arm. Jack, listen to me. This room lies. It builds itself out of doubt. Jack stared at her. Do you believe I'm real? She asked. He hesitated. She pulled him close. Say it. I believe you're real. The breath stuttered. The crack in the floor began to close. Say your name again, she said. Jack Talbot. The figure in the chair began to crumble, bit by bit, like ash. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out. It looked up one final time. I'll wait, it mouthed. We always come back. And then it was gone. The room exhaled. All of it. The floor, the walls, the air, the mirror shattered. And in its place, behind the glass, was a door. Plain, dark, and very, very quiet. Jack turned to Eliza. What do you think's behind that one? She didn't answer. But Jack already knew. The exit, or the core. but only one of them would make it out, and the motel had just started choosing. The door behind the shattered mirror didn't look like the others. It didn't breathe. It didn't whisper. It didn't bleed or shimmer or pulse with that slow, sinister heartbeat the rest of Crestwood's architecture carried. It simply was. A door. Matte black, no handle, no number, no rusted hinges or false promise. Just a flat, perfect rectangle embedded into the space where the mirror used to be, as if it had always been there, and the glass had merely kept it secret. Jack stared at it. His breath felt too loud in the silence that pressed in. This silence didn't feel empty. It felt attentive, like the motel was holding its breath, waiting, not to scare them, not even to threaten. This was the quiet before a question was asked. Eliza didn't move either. She stood beside him, her hand not on his, but near enough to remind him they were still real, that they hadn't yet turned into copies or echoes or whispers. But there was something in her eyes Jack hadn't seen before. Not fear, not resolve. Something more dangerous, certainty. He didn't like the way she was looking at the door. "Eliza," he said, voice rough. "What do you think's on the other side?" She didn't answer at first. Her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beneath the floor, deep and low and private. "I think this is the room's heart," she whispered. "Where it keeps what it can't finish." Jack frowned. "What does that mean?" Her eyes flicked toward him. "You said it before. It doesn't kill. It collects. It copies. But when it can't finish a copy, when someone fights too hard, holds on too long, it puts them here. Maybe to wait. Maybe to rot. A pause. Maybe to try again." Jack stared at the door. He could feel something behind it. Not presence. Not movement. Weight. A kind of psychic gravity that tugged at his chest and memories and blood. Something about the door felt familiar, like he'd already been through it, or like it had already seen inside him long before he'd ever arrived. "We don't open it," he said finally. Eliza didn't speak. She just stepped forward. "Eliza." She paused, not turning back. "I heard my voice, Jack. I mean, really heard it. When I was under. When the room had me. It kept playing it back to me, twisted and slowed and ruined. But underneath all that distortion, there was a recording I never made." Jack's mouth went dry. "What was it?" Her voice cracked. "Me, saying goodbye." The room began to hum. Not loud. Just enough to make the fillings in Jack's teeth ache. The motel was waking up again, responding to the moment, adjusting itself like a hand around something fragile. "I never recorded that, Jack," she said, "which means maybe I did, in another version of this, in another loop. You don't know that." She turned around, finally facing him, eyes sharp. "No, I don't. But it makes sense, doesn't it? The voices. The loops. The guests that come and vanish. The rooms that remember us better than we remember ourselves. What if the motel is stuck, trying to perfect us, rebuild people again and again until it gets the right version?" Jack stepped closer. "Then we burn it down. You can't burn a memory, Jack." His fists clenched. "Then we starve it." Eliza nodded. "Maybe we can. But only if one of us opens that door." Jack froze. "No, one of us has to. It's a pattern, a sacrifice, a price. There's always a choice at the end." "No." Eliza's hand brushed his cheek, soft, final. "I'm already half gone. You know that? You've seen it? I don't remember what month it is. I can't tell you the name of my childhood best friend. I forgot what my dad looked like yesterday, Jack. That part of me, it's gone." "That's what it wants you to think," he said. "But it's a lie." She stepped forward. "Or maybe it's the truth the motel is built on." Jack shook his head, desperate. "Then I'll go. Let me open it." She smiled sadly. "You're still too real. It won't accept you." The humming grew louder. From behind the door, something moved. A shape, barely visible. A distortion like heat on pavement, pressed against the surface. It was waiting, not to attack, not even to emerge. It was waiting for a name. A volunteer. Eliza looked at the door, then back at Jack. "Promise me something," she said. His voice cracked. What? If this place tries to wear me again? If something comes out sounding like me, smiling like me, don't believe it. Eliza, promise. He swallowed. I promise. She nodded, then placed her hand on the door. It opened without a sound. What lay beyond wasn't hell, or fire, or shadow. It was light. Pure, cold, clinical light. Like the kind in operating rooms or interrogation cells. A spotlight, waiting for her to step into it. A stage for something to finish. She crossed the threshold, and the door closed. Jack lunged too late, fists hitting wood. There was no sound on the other side, only silence. Not the kind that watched, not the kind that whispered. Just silence. And then the motel shook. Once, violently, the lights flickered. The hallway behind him began to crumble. He turned, staggering as the floor splintered underfoot, but the motel didn't collapse. It changed. Walls realigned. Ceilings folded in. Rooms shrunk. And Jack was back in the original lobby. The morning light outside was real. The front door was open. Crestwood was quiet. Not breathing, not watching, just still. He stepped outside. The air smelled like pine. No mist, no static. No whisper of his name on the wind. And yet, as he turned to look at the motel one last time, the sign above the door flickered faintly. Crestwood Inn, vacancy, and carved newly, just beneath it, room 6 reserved for her. Jack didn't speak to anyone after he left Crestwood. He drove until the motel vanished behind a wall of trees, until his gas tank hit empty, until the smell of pine was replaced by exhaust and asphalt and the far-off buzz of civilization. He stopped in a small town with no name he could recall, parked in front of a diner, and just sat there. His phone, which hadn't worked inside Crestwood, buzzed back to life the moment he crossed county lines. 57 unread messages. 12 missed calls. 2 voicemails. None of them were from Eliza. He didn't listen to them. Not yet, inside the diner. The coffee was too strong and the waitress too polite. She smiled in that way people do when they're pretending not to be scared of something they don't understand. Jack realized he was probably still caked in some layer of that place. Crestwood dust, grief soaked into his jacket, a shadow clinging to the back of his neck. But he didn't care. He drank 3 cups, wrote down nothing, and left without paying. Nobody stopped him. For days he drifted, motel to motel, never room 6. He always asked, always avoided, until one night, 4 towns away, he stayed in a place that didn't even have numbered doors. Just keys with faded plastic tags. He laid on the bed, stared at the ceiling fan, and thought about the silence behind that black door. The light that wasn't light. The thing that had waited for Eliza. He still didn't know what it had done to her. Only that she had gone willingly. Only that she'd said goodbye before he was ready to hear it. On the 7th night, the dreams came. They weren't violent. They weren't loud. But they stuck. He'd see her walking down a long hallway, barefoot, voice humming something familiar, tuneless but constant, always just out of reach, never looking back. The light above her would flicker, and then she'd stop, touch the wall, and disappear. Not vanish, but fold into the architecture, as if she had become part of it. A joint in the wood, a breath in the vent. One night, he woke up with her name carved into his forearm. Not deeply, just enough to raise the skin. He didn't scream. He just stared, because the carving wasn't new. It was scar tissue, faint white, healed, like it had been there for years. That's when Jack understood what the motel had meant. When it said she'd left a version of herself behind, it hadn't been a metaphor. Eliza was the room now. Not a ghost, not a memory. Something in between. He thought about going back. But what would he do? Stand in the lobby and beg a breathless hallway to give her back? Demand an answer from the vents? There was no ritual for retrieving someone from the jaws of a thing that didn't have a name. Still, he had to try. And Crestwood was waiting. It always was. When he returned, the motel looked wrong. Not worse, better. The vines had been cut, the windows washed. The sign was fully lit. Even the gravel in the parking lot looked recently spread, as if someone had started caring again. That was the scariest part. Simon and Ed were nowhere to be seen. The lobby was unlocked, unguarded, and filled with the faint smell of lavender. And behind the desk, in the guest book, a single new entry, Lisa Marie Moore, room 6. No date, no time. Just the name. Jack ran. Room 6 stood at the end of the hallway, unchanged. Same pale door, same brass knob. The air was warmer now, quieter, but beneath that stillness was a vibration, like a song held between notes. He gripped the knob, turned. It opened easily. Inside the room was hers, not a replica, hers. Posters from her college dorm pinned to the walls, her coffee mug on the desk, the worn denim jacket she always refused to throw out folded neatly over the chair. Her scent, clove and lilac, hung in the air, and sitting on the edge of the bed facing the window was her. "Eliza," he said, voice cracking. She didn't move. He stepped inside. "Eliza, it's me." She turned. She smiled. It was her smile, but her eyes weren't empty or black or mirror polished like the others. They were bright, awake, alive. "You came back," she said softly. Jack approached, slow. "What did it do to you?" She looked around. "It let me remember." "Remember what?" Eliza looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "The parts I didn't want. The ones I left behind. All the versions of me I threw away, out of fear, out of shame, out of convenience. It collected them, but it didn't destroy them. It just kept them. Waiting, so I could see myself fully and choose." "Choose what?" "Who I really am." Jack sat beside her. "Are you real?" She touched his hand. He felt warmth. "I think I am." They sat in silence for what felt like hours. No whispers, no crawling sounds. Just the hum of light and the soft rustle of wind through the curtain. "But the motel," Jack said finally, "it's still here. Still open." Eliza nodded. "Because there are others. Others. People who forgot too much. Who let themselves be hollowed. Who listened too long. The Crestwood isn't a predator. It's a mirror. It shows you the cost of forgetting who you are." Jack leaned back, wary. "So what happens now?" Eliza smiled again. "We stay. Just a little longer. Help the next one find their way out." He turned to her. "We become the room." "No," she said. "We become the ones who remember." And outside, as dusk fell over the Crestwood Inn, the sign flickered one final time. Vacancy. Then beneath it, room 6 occupied, guide available. The motel waited. Not because it had to, because it knew. There was always another. Someone drifting just far enough from who they were. Someone broken in the right places, cracked in a way the Crestwood could fill. That's what it hunted. Gaps. Not in walls. In people. And this time, it didn't have to wait long. Her name was Cassidy Vale, 38, divorced, recently jobless. No kids, no close friends. Her father, who used to call her every Sunday without fail, had died the previous fall. She'd been on the road for hours, eyes sore from too much crying, too much caffeine, too little sleep. The motel appeared on her left like it had been built from the fog itself. No turnoff, no sign announcing its presence until it was right in front of her. But the vacancy light called to her, not with menace, with relief. Warm, red, familiar. She pulled in, gravel crackling beneath her tires, headlights washing over the newly polished front windows. The place looked old but cared for, like someone had recently dusted it off and whispered to it, "Wake up, it's time again." Cassidy checked in. No one stood behind the desk, but the bell rang when she entered, and a small placard appeared on the counter. "Please take your key." Key, not card. A tarnished brass skeleton key tied to a tag, room 6. She hesitated only a moment, but Cassidy, like many before her, had learned not to trust hesitation. It had cost her too many things already. She walked the hallway slowly, dragging her overnight bag behind her. Her boots thudded softly against the carpet. The doors she passed were quiet, though she had the sense, unshakable, that every knob was turned slightly toward her, every door tilted a fraction open on the inside. Watching. When she reached room 6, she stood there longer than necessary. The door wasn't threatening. It looked like any motel door. Beige. Generic. But something about it made her want to press her ear to the wood, just to see. And when she did, she heard nothing. No breath, no hum. Just her own heartbeat pulsing in her ears, too fast. The key turned easily. Inside, the room welcomed her like it had been waiting specifically for her. There was a folded note on the pillow. Handwritten. Neat cursive. Cassidy, if you're reading this, you're not alone. Sit down. Don't run. Let it show you. No name. No signature. The air inside the room smelled faintly of lilac. She set her bag down and sank into the edge of the bed. The mirror on the wall flickered, not literally, but in memory. A brief flash of her childhood bedroom. Her father's voice. Then gone. She blinked. Get out, she whispered to herself. Get out now. But when she stood and turned to the door, it had already changed. No knob. No exit. Only her reflection in the mirror, staring back, still Cassidy, but tired. Older than she remembered. Her reflection smiled faintly. Then said finally, "You're back." Cassidy stumbled backward, hitting the dresser. The reflection didn't follow. It sat perfectly still. "I don't remember you," Cassidy said aloud. The voice from the mirror replied softly, "That's the point." A vent above the bed whispered once. Just a sigh. Then silence again. She moved slowly toward the mirror. Her own image had returned. Unmoving. Honest. But something about her posture looked unfamiliar. Like someone had tried to mimic the way she stood and hadn't quite gotten it right. "I don't know what this is," Cassidy murmured. And the room replied, not through a voice, not through sound, but through memory. Suddenly, she was 6 years old again, peeking through a crack in her parents' bedroom door, her mother sobbing, her father yelling, a glass shattering, her name not mentioned once. Then 8, watching her dog being buried in the backyard, pretending not to care. Then 23, standing in a parking lot as her fiancé drove away for the last time. Memory after memory, each one that she'd buried, denied, minimized, now laid bare. She sank to her knees, and the mirror changed again. This time, it showed a different room. The same layout, same walls, but 2 figures sat inside, a man and a woman, watching, waiting, Jack and Eliza. Cassidy stared, unsure if she was hallucinating, if the motel had taken her already. But then Jack's voice came, soft but clear, like he was speaking from just the other side of the mirror. "We're not here to trap you." Eliza added, "We're here to help you remember." Cassidy's lip trembled. "Remember what?" Jack answered, "That you still exist." The light flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the wind shifted. Room 6 had opened itself again, not to feed, not to trick, to guide. And somewhere deep in the walls, buried beneath layers of whispers and stolen voices, something began to change. Not disappear, not die, but weaken. Because for the first time in its long, hungry existence, the Crestwood Inn was being understood. Cassidy didn't sleep that night, not really. She lay in the bed, under covers that felt too familiar for a room she'd never entered before. Eyes fixed on the ceiling, while thoughts she didn't remember thinking scrolled through her mind, like a film running just a frame too fast. Every few minutes, she caught her breath, certain she'd heard a knock or a whisper, or the hum of a voice forming behind the walls, but each time, it faded into silence before she could be sure. The room pulsed faintly around her, not with sound, but with presence, like a house watching its occupant decide whether to run or stay. At 3:14 a.m., the mirror changed again. She didn't move right away, didn't even flinch. Something inside her had already started to shift. Her fear, once sharp and immediate, now felt dull, softened under a growing, strange sense of clarity. The motel wasn't hunting her. It wasn't after her. It had chosen her, in the same way you might choose a forgotten drawer to finally open. Something about her had already been here. In the mirror, the glass shimmered, not a reflection this time, but a scene. Her childhood bedroom. She recognized the wallpaper, the crooked dresser, the broken lamp no one had ever fixed. A younger version of herself sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a notebook. Cassidy stood and stepped closer. The reflection didn't acknowledge her. It played like a memory, but one she couldn't place. The girl on the bed was muttering something. Cassidy leaned in. "Don't forget this one," the girl said. "Not this one." She wrote something in the notebook, then looked directly up at her, at Cassidy. Not the mirror, not the room. Her. Then the scene shifted, fast, sudden. The bedroom melted into a hospital hallway. Cassidy's mother slumped against a wall, sobbing into her hands. A nurse stood nearby, saying something muted and mechanical. Cassidy had never seen this memory, but somehow she knew it. She could feel the sharp, desperate pull in her chest. The thing she hadn't let herself face. Her mother had miscarried a second child. A sister she'd never met, and no one ever told her. The room pulsed again. Behind her, the vent sighed. "You're doing better than most," a voice said. Cassidy spun. Jack stood in the doorway. Still tall, still tired, but steady. Not a ghost, not a figment. Flesh and blood and shadow and thought. Cassidy stared at him, unable to speak. Then Eliza appeared beside him. She held something in her hand. A worn tape recorder. Same model as Cassidy's father used to carry when he taught. "Your memories aren't trying to hurt you," Eliza said. "They're trying to come home." Cassidy finally found her voice. "Why me?" But Jack stepped into the room. "Because you've forgotten too much." "I didn't mean to. No one ever does." Cassidy sat back on the bed. "This place, it's not normal." "It's not supposed to be," Eliza said. "The Crestwood is what they used to call a thin place. A spot where the world between who you were and who you are starts to thin out. And when it does," Cassidy asked. Jack's eyes darkened slightly. "You either remember or you're remembered for." Eliza offered the recorder. Cassidy hesitated, then took it. There was no tape inside. Just an empty reel. "It'll record what you recover," Eliza said, "and you'll need it when the room starts pushing back." Cassidy frowned. "What do you mean?" Jack glanced at the vent. "It's listening now. It knows you're waking up." The mirror cracked slightly. Not shattered. Just a fine spider web near the top right corner. From the hallway, a soft thud echoed. Eliza backed toward the door. "The others are coming." Cassidy stood. "Others. Not people," Jack said. "Versions." Of course, Cassidy thought. The ones who forgot. The ones the motel kept. The fragments. The first knock came at the door. Soft. Then harder. Cassidy turned, instinctively stepping back. The lock twisted on its own. Jack grabbed her wrist. "You have to hold your memories close." "That's your only armor." Cassidy blinked. "How? Say your name." "Cassidy Vale." "Louder!" "Cassidy Vale!" Another knock. This one hard enough to shake the frame. The mirror flickered again. Now showing her apartment years ago, the night her marriage collapsed, her ex-husband yelling, her silent, numbed expression. Then, flashing again, her college dorm, crying on the floor after a professor accused her of cheating on a paper she'd written with her whole soul. Then again, her grandmother's funeral, forgotten by nearly everyone except Cassidy. Each image burned into her like a brand. She whispered through gritted teeth, "I remember all of it." The door burst open, and the thing stepped in. It was her, but thinner, hollow-eyed, mouth too wide, shoulders stooped as if bearing decades more grief than Cassidy had ever lived. It looked at her, then grinned. "You weren't enough." Cassidy stepped forward. "You're not me," she said. The creature smiled wider. "You made me." Jack shouted, "Say something only you would know!" Cassidy closed her eyes, focused. "The first lie I told," she said, voice shaking, "was that I didn't care when he left." The thing blinked. "I did care," she said louder. "And I've spent 20 years pretending that didn't happen, that I didn't feel it. But I did. And that makes me real." The thing stumbled, flickered, then cracked, split down the middle, and vanished into smoke, silence. The room settled. Cassidy exhaled. Eliza smiled. "That's how you start." Jack looked toward the hallway. "More will come." Cassidy nodded. "Then I'll be ready." She picked up the recorder. pressed the red button, and spoke into it for the first time. My name is Cassidy Vale. I'm 38. I remember now, and I'm still here. The Crestwood Inn was watching. And, for the first time, it wasn't sure who would win. Cassidy didn't sleep the next night either. The motel didn't allow it, not once your memory had been stirred. Once the first echo answered, they all began to crawl forward, like splinters rising under skin. The Crestwood Inn had no shortage of ghosts, but the worst ones didn't float or whisper. They remembered. Half-shaped versions of the self, left behind by the people who'd fled or folded. They weren't haunting her. They were becoming her. Unless she kept speaking, she recorded everything. At first it was names, places. Details too dull to mean much unless you'd lived them. Her first bike was blue. She couldn't swim until she was 13. Her father's middle name was Harold. Her ex-husband had once cried into her shoulder when he lost his job and begged her not to tell anyone. The mundane became sacred the longer she said it aloud. Her voice grew steadier, clearer, and she noticed something every time she remembered. The walls changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but the air got lighter. The mirror's cracks faded. The vent didn't sigh as often. The room listened. So did the rest of the motel. By the third night, Cassidy walked the halls. Not out of bravery, out of necessity. She needed to see how deep this place went. She passed room 3 and heard someone sobbing quietly. Knocked. No answer. She didn't push. Not yet. Room 4 hummed like a faraway power station. Room 5 was cold. No sound, no feeling, just absence. Like the room had been erased but the door hadn't been told. Then she reached room 2. The door was ajar, and inside, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was a boy. 10, maybe 11. Skinny, pale, eyes rimmed with shadows that didn't match his age. He looked up at her. "You're new," he said. Cassidy didn't step in. "So are you." The boy shook his head slowly. "I've been here a long time." "What's your name?" He hesitated. Then Simon. The name hit her. Not just for what it was, but how he said it. It didn't sound like a child's voice. It sounded hollowed. Like someone remembering how to be young. "Simon," she repeated, stepping into the room. The temperature dropped. Sharp, sudden. Like stepping into a freezer with no door. "What are you doing in here?" He looked at the wall. "Waiting for myself." Cassidy crouched beside him. "I don't understand." Simon turned his head slowly. "I ran from something. Years ago. I don't remember what, but I left me here." Cassidy stared. "You're not real?" she asked. His lips twitched into a faint, broken smile. "I'm what's left when you stay too long but don't let go." She thought of Jack, of Eliza, of the shadows wearing their smiles. The motel didn't steal people all at once. It wore them down, like waves against stone. What was left wasn't always dead. Sometimes it was just unfinished. Simon gestured toward the corner. Cassidy turned and saw him, an adult version of Simon. Lean, quiet, standing barefoot with a face completely blank, no features, just skin stretched across his skull. The body didn't move. It just stood, vibrating faintly like static caught in flesh. "He's been like that for years," the boy whispered. "I think he's waiting for me to grow into him." Cassidy stood, unease crawling up her spine. "Have you tried speaking to him?" "I can't," Simon said. "If I speak, I become him. If I'm quiet, I stay here." Cassidy swallowed. "But staying here, it's not real." He looked at her again, and for a flicker of a second, she saw someone much older behind those young eyes. "I know," he whispered. She didn't know what made her do it. Maybe the sheer wrongness of the situation, maybe something deeper. But she stepped forward, faced the blank version of Simon, and said clearly, "Your name is Simon. You're not empty. You are not forgotten." The static man twitched. The boy whimpered behind her. "Don't," but Cassidy kept going. "You were a child. You were scared. But that's not all you are. You can speak. You can return." The mirror behind the static man shattered inward. Not outward, like something had come in from the other side. The adult Simon collapsed to the floor, still blank, but no longer twitching, and the boy was gone. Cassidy turned. Room 2 was empty. She ran back to her own room, shut the door, locked it. Then she recorded, "My name is Cassidy Vale. I just spoke a boy into being, or maybe out of being. I don't know. But I know this: the motel keeps the silenced. The ones who stop speaking. The ones who give up their names. That's how it takes you. One piece at a time." She sat on the bed, breathing hard. And for the first time, the vent above her head didn't sigh. It whispered, "Thank you." Cassidy didn't answer the whisper. Not right away. She sat perfectly still, heart thundering in her chest, the recorder still clutched in her hand. The words "thank you" echoing softly above her, like a thread pulled taut across reality. Not mocking, not malicious, just grateful. Sincere. And that made it worse. Because, for the first time since stepping foot into the Crestwood Inn, something inside these walls sounded human. She rose slowly, crossing the room to stand beneath the vent. It looked ordinary, small, square, painted over a dozen times, dust coating the slats. But the air flowing through it had changed. No longer stale or metallic, it smelled faintly of rosemary. The scent tugged something loose in her. Her grandmother's garden, late summer evenings, the hush of sprinklers and the hum of bees. A memory she hadn't thought of in years. "I didn't do it for you," she whispered. The vent didn't reply. But the air shifted, warm for a moment, as if the motel had heard and, worse, understood. That scared her more than any echo ever had. She sat again, turned on the recorder, and spoke quickly. "Something's changed. The motel is watching differently now. It's closer. I think it's trying to speak, not just mimic. I think it's remembering, or learning how." The tape clicked softly as it spun, a steady noise in the silence. Her voice captured. Her identity secured. That recorder had become more than a tool. It was an anchor. As long as she kept speaking, she stayed tethered to herself. Then, from somewhere deep in the walls, the sound of another voice. This one wasn't her own. It wasn't Jack. It wasn't Eliza. It was Simon, a man's voice now, worn, quiet, but unmistakably his. "Cassidy," it said. "You pulled me out. I remember now." She froze, then scrambled to the door, flinging it open. The hallway was dark. Not in a power outage way, but like the darkness had settled there, thick and comfortable. A kind of shadow that didn't depend on the absence of light. It wasn't oppressive. It was patient. Cassidy stepped out. The air buzzed faintly. At the end of the hallway, room 2's door was open. She walked slowly. Inside, the room was clean, the bed made, the walls unmarked. But sitting in the chair near the window was a man. Simon, not the boy, not the blank figure. A man in his 30s, thin but not gaunt, dressed in clothes that didn't belong to any decade. His hands rested on his knees. His eyes were kind, tired, awake. "You weren't supposed to remember me," he said. Cassidy stepped in, cautiously. "What does that mean?" "I wasn't finished," he said. "I was meant to stay here. A half thing. A memory of someone who left too much behind. You were just a boy." Simon nodded. "But the motel keeps all versions. All possibilities. If you don't speak them, they stay." She sat on the bed. "So why are you whole now?" Simon smiled, soft and sad. "Because you spoke to me. Not about me. That's different. That changes something." Cassidy looked at him for a long moment. "So is that how we win?" His smile faded. "Win." She nodded. "Beat this place. Burn it down. Break it." Simon's gaze drifted toward the vent above the window. "I don't think it can be broken. It's not a machine. It's not cursed. It's alive. It's memory. Left too long in the dark, it collects what people leave behind. Pain, regret, silence. Then why help me?" Cassidy asked. "Because it's changing," he said. "You're changing it." Cassidy frowned. "Me? You're doing what most people don't. You're remembering. Not just for yourself, for others. You're reaching through the wall." A pause. He looked directly at her. "You're not the first to do it. But you're the first it didn't swallow." The silence between them stretched, heavy with implication. Then Simon stood, I have to go, he said. Go where? He looked toward the door. Back into the hallways. There are others. And then he said something Cassidy would never forget. You're not a guest anymore. She blinked. What? You're part of the room now. Not owned by it. Not taken. Woven into it. But willingly. You carry memory. You're an echo that pushes outward. Cassidy stood slowly, the weight of his words settling into her chest like a second heartbeat. Then, from the hallway, another voice. A woman's, small, hesitant. Hello? Is someone there? Cassidy turned. Simon smiled. It's your turn now. He faded, gently, like mist slipping into morning. Not broken, not devoured, freed. Cassidy stepped out into the hall. At the far end, a new figure had arrived. A girl, maybe 20. Clutching a duffel bag, eyes wide, the door to room 8 creaked behind her ajar. Cassidy stepped forward. Her voice steady, strong. Hey, you're not alone. The girl blinked. I think I'm lost. No, Cassidy said, reaching for the recorder. You're just remembering. Behind them, somewhere deep in the bones of the motel, the walls pulsed once. Not in warning, in recognition. The girl's name was Leah Dorn. And she didn't believe in ghosts. Not until the room whispered her father's last words before she even opened her mouth. She hadn't spoken them aloud in years, not since the funeral, not since they'd been stolen from her by time and grief, and the numbness that clings like a second skin. But room 8 knew them, said them, softly, like a lullaby, like a promise. Be good, I'll be right behind you. Leah froze in the doorway, her hand still clutching the strap of her duffel. Her other hand trembled, almost violently, like her body was rejecting the memory before her mind even caught up. Cassidy stood a few feet behind her, close enough to step in if the girl turned and ran, but Leah didn't run, she listened. Cassidy didn't interrupt. She remembered what that moment felt like. The first time the motel said something it shouldn't know. The way your stomach drops and your brain tries to convince you it's coincidence, a trick, a slip of the imagination. But it never is. The motel doesn't guess, it knows. Lee stepped inside, slowly, like a diver dipping a toe into uncertain waters. The door shut behind her. Cassidy followed. The room looked ordinary at first. Beige walls, a single bed with mismatched pillows, a lamp that flickered once, then held steady, a desk with a notepad beside an old rotary phone. Nothing unusual, and yet everything in it watched. Not literally. There were no eyes, just attention. I don't remember booking this place, Lee said, her voice faint. You didn't, Cassidy replied gently. Lee turned, confused. Then how did I get here? Cassidy shrugged. Same way I did. Same way everyone does. You stopped running long enough to be noticed. Leah stepped backward. What does that mean? It means, Cassidy said slowly, that something inside you broke open. And the motel smelled it. Leah looked at the mirror above the desk. Her reflection stared back, pale and drawn. But then, as Cassidy watched, a second Lee appeared in the glass, standing just behind her. Not touching, not speaking, just waiting. Watching. Don't look at it, Cassidy warned. Leah didn't move. That's not you, Cassidy added. It's the silence you left behind. Lee blinked. It looks like me. They always do. The mirror flickered. The second Lee stepped closer. Cassidy reached into her jacket and pulled out her recorder, flipped it on, spoke. This is Cassidy Vale. I'm with Lee Dorn in room 8. We're not forgetting today. The mirror hissed. That hiss had become familiar now, like the room flinching. The motel reacted when you spoke your truth, when you named yourself. Leah, Cassidy said calmly, tell me something only you would know. Lee swallowed hard. I don't know what you mean. The memory that hurts, the one you keep hidden. Say it. The second Lee was almost against the glass now. Her face was wrong, too smooth, too calm, like it had never cried. Leah's eyes filled. He didn't die in his sleep. Cassidy didn't interrupt. I told everyone he passed peacefully, Lee said, voice breaking. But I found him. In the garage. Rope around his neck. Hey, he left me. The second Leah smiled. But then the glass cracked, sharp and fast, and the fake Leah's face peeled away, unraveling into static. Lee gasped. Cassidy placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're remembering," she whispered. The room sighed, not from the vent, not from the floor, from the walls themselves. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the desk drawer creaked open. Inside was a photograph. Lee picked it up. It was her and her father, on a beach, smiling. She'd never seen the photo before. She didn't know who had taken it. But the image was real. She remembered the moment. She remembered the exact laugh she'd made when the wave caught her ankle. Tears slid down her face. "I forgot this," she said. Cassidy nodded. "But it remembered for you." The motel wasn't just a trap. It was a vault, a haunted archive of lost things. And the more Cassidy saw, the more she realized not all of it wanted to hurt. Some of it, deep in the bones, wanted to be healed. But the hurt didn't leave easily. They left room 8 together. Leah's steps steadier now, her mouth set, jaw tight. She didn't speak for a while, but Cassidy didn't mind. The silence between them wasn't hollow. It was full. Full of memory, full of reclaimed space. And as they walked, the hallway behind them pulsed once, wood shifting, floor settling, lights blinking in rhythm. For a moment, Cassidy could feel it. The motel was breathing, but not to swallow. To listen. The next guest didn't arrive by accident. He came back. Cassidy was sitting in the lobby when the bell above the door rang and the man stepped inside. Tall, 40-something, gaunt but steady. His eyes held the same haunted glaze she'd seen in her own reflection during the first days. But there was something else too. Determination. Not the kind born of curiosity or fear, but of obsession, of unfinished business. He didn't glance around or ask for help. He moved straight to the front desk and placed his hand on the old wooden surface like he'd touched it 100 times before. "Room 6, he said. "Now." Cassidy rose slowly. "It's occupied." He turned. Their eyes locked, and everything in her stilled, because she recognized him, not from memory, not from dreams, but from the walls. She'd seen his face etched in the quiet, felt his breath pressed into the floorboards, heard his voice once in the hum behind the vent, whispering a name over and over again like a warning. "Jack," she said. His mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're Cassidy." She nodded. "I've heard you," he said. "And I've heard you," she replied. For a long moment, neither moved. And then he exhaled, a sound like something surrendering. "I need to see her." Cassidy didn't need to ask who. Eliza. The woman who'd stayed. The one who'd become something between person and place. The motel hadn't devoured her, it had kept her. Used her voice as a thread to pull others out of the dark. But Eliza hadn't spoken in weeks. Not directly, not since Cassidy had taken up the role of guide. "She hasn't come forward," Cassidy said gently. "Not in days." "She will," Jack said. "If she knows I'm here." Cassidy studied him. The lines in his face. The way he held his shoulders like they carried something unbearable. "She might not be the same," she warned. "I'm not either," he said. Cassidy looked down at the guest book. The pages had begun writing themselves in recent days. Ink curling across paper without pen or hand. Memories pressed into the paper like a heartbeat. She turned to a blank page. Already waiting, there was a name, Jack Talbot returned beneath it, room 9. Cassidy met his eyes. "Room 9, she said. "It's not like the others." "I know," Jack replied. "It's ours." The room wasn't ready for him. It remade itself as he approached. Cassidy followed at a distance, watching the walls ripple softly as he passed, as if they recognized his step, as if they mourned or braced or remembered too much. Room 9 had been empty before, locked from the inside, untouched by guests, invisible on the registry until this morning. Now it pulsed. Inside, the air was thick with silence, but not the dangerous kind, the reverent kind, like the pause between final words and the dirt hitting the coffin. He stepped in alone. Cassidy waited outside. He closed the door behind him. The room was dim. The light came not from the lamp, but from the mirror, glowing faintly, like it contained a fire that couldn't escape. And sitting in the chair by the bed was a figure he hadn't seen in months, maybe longer. Time inside the Crestwood didn't pass like it did outside. Days bent. Weeks folded in on themselves. Memory replaced clocks. But it was her, Eliza. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. "I told you not to follow me," she said softly. Jack stepped forward. "You knew I would." Her voice trembled. "I hoped you wouldn't." He knelt beside her. "Why?" "Because if you came back, it meant I didn't do enough." Jack shook his head. "You saved me. I lost myself. You became yourself." Her hands were shaking. Pale. Real. But her eyes, when they finally met his, held something the room had etched into her, clarity beyond survival. "You still want to pull people out," she said. Jack nodded. "I do." "Then you can't stay." He didn't answer. The mirror behind her flickered. And for a breath, they weren't in the room. They were in a memory. The hallway where they'd first crossed paths. The laughter from years ago. The long car ride. The road trip that had ended too soon. The half-finished podcast episode. The final message she never recorded. "You still have more to say," Eliza whispered. Jack swallowed. "Not without you." She took his hand. And then something unthinkable happened. The room split. Cassidy, outside the door, stumbled back as the walls buckled inward. Not collapsing, shedding. The plaster fell away, revealing dark, breathing roots beneath. Not plant, not wood, but memory made visible. A lattice of stories, regret, joy, sorrow, threads of all who had passed through. And in the center a light, not blinding, welcoming. Cassidy moved forward, just to the edge of the doorway, and inside, Jack and Eliza stood in that light. He was holding her hand, and she was glowing, but not in some mystical, unnatural way. She looked alive, fully, entirely, heartbreakingly alive. She looked like Eliza Moore, the one who had been lost, then claimed, then chosen. Cassidy stepped back. The door to room 9 shut gently behind her. No lock, no hiss, just a quiet click, like a chapter ending, not in fear but peace. And for the first time since the Crestwood had opened its doors, a room didn't echo with pain. It hummed with something else. Wholeness. Room 9 stayed quiet after the door closed, but the silence it held was different. Not the kind that dragged you under. This was dense, layered, sacred. The hush of a final confession, of two voices finally sensing after being distorted for too long. Cassidy didn't move. She stood in the hallway, outside the door with her hand still half raised, as though part of her expected it to open again. For Jack to step out and say something clever and unfinished, for Eliza to grin with that knowing edge she'd worn even in the recordings. But the door stayed shut. The light underneath it faded. The Crestwood had changed. Not all at once. Not everywhere. The darkness still gathered in corners. The vents still exhaled. But something deep in the foundation, something old and heavy and wordless, shifted. Cassidy could feel it in her bones. The motel had always been a collector, a keeper of what people couldn't face, couldn't carry. But now, it was becoming something more aware of itself. She turned away and walked down the hall. Room 6, long occupied, pulsed like a sleeping animal. Room 2, once Simon's echo chamber, was now empty, stripped of the chill that had haunted it. Even room 8, where Lee had cracked her past wide open, had gone still, peaceful in a way Cassidy hadn't seen before. The motel wasn't shedding its skin. It was remembering it. And then, the whispers began. Not soft, creeping things in the vents. These came from the walls themselves. From inside the wood, from behind paint that hadn't peeled, from outlets that sparked just once. Names, hundreds of them. No malice in their tone. Just need. Desperate. Reaching need. Jonah. May. Felix. Renata, please. Still here. Still waiting. Cassidy stopped in the middle of the hall, every hair on her body lifting. The Crestwood wasn't done. Not even close. It hadn't just kept the people who forgot, it had kept the ones no one remembered at all. She turned sharply and marched back to the front desk. The guest book was open again, pages fluttering like they were caught in a breeze, but there was no wind. The motel was breathing through the paper now. She ran her fingers across the ink. Names she didn't know. Names written in different handwriting, from different years, different centuries. All of them real. All of them trapped. Some never spoken aloud again by anyone. Cassidy picked up her recorder and pressed the red button. "My name is Cassidy Vale," she said. "I am speaking the forgotten back into existence." Then, one by one, she began to read. Adelaide Wren, Room 11, the walls pulsed. Marcus Keene, Room 7, the air thinned. Isadora Lay, Room 3, the lights flickered. Somewhere, a door creaked open. As she continued, the motel shifted again. Doors long sealed cracked. Hallways she'd never seen branched outward, impossibly twisting into new geometry. Stairs where there'd never been stairs. Elevators humming behind wallpaper. Mirrors blinking open like eyes. The Crestwood was rearranging itself, not out of malice, but response. She had spoken the names, and the place listened. Cassidy didn't stop. Even when her throat burned. Even when the lights above her buzzed hot. Even when the vent above her opened, and whispered one long breath across the back of her neck, like it wanted to kiss her, or warn her, or thank her. She read until her voice gave out. Then she sat back, recorder still spinning, and waited. Nothing happened. Then a door opened behind her. She turned, and there stood a woman, middle-aged, disheveled, pale as ash. Her mouth trembled before she spoke. "You said my name," she whispered. Cassidy stood slowly. "Isadora." The woman nodded. "I was 15 when I got here," she said. "No one ever said my name after. Not once. I forgot how it sounded until you said it." Cassidy stepped closer. "You're free." Isadora's face crumpled. "I don't know how to leave. You don't have to figure it out alone." More doors opened. More footsteps echoed. People stepping out of silence. Not ghosts, not creatures. Not monsters, people. The forgotten. They came slowly, cautiously, blinking against the light that hadn't touched them in years. Some cried. Some laughed. Some stood blank, waiting for themselves to catch up. Cassidy looked around. The Crestwood's walls shimmered, not melting, not breaking. Loosening. Letting go of what it had carried for too long. And somewhere behind it all, behind the name, stained walls and memory, soaked wood, a voice whispered again. Not in the vents. From the foundation, it said one word more. Not hunger. Not warning. A request. A call. Cassidy turned to face the open doors, the flickering halls, the unfolding maze of lives that had been hidden in the breath between breaths. And she whispered back, "Then let's find them." Cassidy had always known the motel went deeper, though no one had ever said so directly. It wasn't in the blueprints. It wasn't in the guest book. But she could feel it beneath her. Something massive, buried under the lobby floorboards, pulsing like a buried heart. Now, with the names spoken and doors opening, the Crestwood had begun to stir in earnest. It no longer hid its depths. It invited her to them. The invitation came not in words, but sound. In the middle of the night, as Cassidy dozed in a worn chair in the front office, the floorboards beneath her feet shifted. Not violently, gently. The kind of movement that a person might mistake for the wind or settling beams. But she knew better. She'd been here too long to mistake intention for accident. There was a rhythm to it. A pattern. The floor was tapping, 3 soft knocks. She stood slowly. The room was dark except for the dim glow of the guest book, still open, still humming faintly under its own breath. The front desk was silent. The hallway beyond, still. But under her feet the wood pulsed once more. Knock, knock, knock. She moved the rug aside and saw it a seam in the floor that hadn't been there before. Thin, clean, a perfect square. Cassidy ran her fingers along the edge. It was warm, a trapdoor. She hesitated, then opened it. The stairs were stone, narrow, slick with condensation. Spiraling down into shadow, no lights lined the walls. No sound echoed upward. Yet Cassidy stepped forward without her recorder. Not out of forgetfulness, but instinct. She had the names now. The motel couldn't take them again. They were recorded, and deep below, the place where the motel kept its silence waited. Step after step, the temperature dropped. The air thickened. The weight of decades, not years, pressed against her skin. She could feel them, memories that were too broken to speak, names buried too long, grief that had curdled into something sharp. The motel had absorbed all of it over time, layer upon layer, and now the foundation pulsed with that sorrow. After what felt like hours, she reached the bottom. The chamber was vast, round, lined with mirrors, none of which reflected her. Instead, they played moments, not hers, others. A man screaming in a burning car. A girl with blood on her hands, standing in a classroom. An elderly woman staring out a window as paramedics wheeled a body away. Hundreds of fragments, glimpses, none lasting more than a breath. In the center stood a single chair, empty, facing one mirror that didn't move. Cassidy stepped toward it. The glass shimmered, then stilled, and for the first time she saw herself, but not as she was now. This Cassidy was young, 20, maybe 21, vibrant, confident, smiling too wide, laughing at something just off screen. The version of her that had never lost anything yet, never buried her father, never watched a marriage with her, never arrived at this place, recorder in hand, voice ragged from naming ghosts. The younger Cassidy turned and looked directly at her. Her smile faltered, and then she spoke. "I was the one you left behind." Cassidy staggered back a step. "I didn't leave you," she whispered. The reflection shook her head. "You did. When you started lying about how much it hurt. When you started pretending none of it mattered." Cassidy closed her eyes. The mirrors around the room trembled, vibrating in a soft chorus. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked the silence. The voice from the mirror answered again. "Because until you face what you were, you can't free what you carry." Cassidy stepped closer. The young Cassidy's eyes brimmed with something ancient, grief that had been buried alive and learned how to speak. "I'm sorry," the real Cassidy whispered. "Say it louder. I'm sorry. Again. I'm sorry I forgot you. I'm sorry I tried to erase the version of me that loved too much, that hoped too much. I thought she was weak. You were wrong." "I know." The reflection smiled, then vanished. Behind Cassidy, something clicked. The chair in the center of the room was no longer empty. A figure sat there now, still slumped forward. She approached slowly. It was Leah's father, alive but frozen. A faint pulse at his neck, and next to him, a note in delicate handwriting. "You remembered for her. So I stayed. Until now." Cassidy touched his shoulder. He didn't stir, but his body felt light, like something had been lifted from it. He wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was at rest. The mirrors blinked, one by one. The chamber pulsed. The motel was exhaling centuries of grief. And somewhere above, she felt the entire building shift. The walls moved not to trap, but to clear a path. Back upstairs, the hallways were changing. Doors that had been locked forever now stood open. People wandered, dazed, blinking whole. Lee helped an older woman find her name on the wall. A boy sat with his knees pulled to his chest, holding a photograph to his chest. The Crestwood was becoming what it never meant to be, a place for the living. Cassidy emerged from the basement as the first morning sun touched the east windows. The motel didn't creak or groan. It hummed. Like something ancient and tired had finally begun to heal. She turned to the lobby, and there, behind the desk, stood Eliza. Whole, smiling, holding a key in her hand. "You've done it," Eliza said. Cassidy blinked. "What?" "You remembered everything but one thing." Cassidy frowned. "What?" Eliza placed the key gently on the counter. It read room 0. "There's still one door left," she said. "The one we were never meant to open." Cassidy looked at the key. It was warm. It vibrated faintly in her palm. And from deep in the floor below, the motel whispered a final word, "Ready." Room 0 wasn't on any map, not etched into the guest book, not scribbled in the frayed employee manual Cassidy had found stuffed into the drawer weeks ago, not even acknowledged by the motel itself. but the key was real. Heavy in her palm, warm like skin, humming faintly with the kind of energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand tall. She turned it over once, twice, no engraving beyond the 0. Nothing to hint at location. It shouldn't have existed, and yet, somehow, it had always been waiting. Eliza didn't explain. She simply stood behind the desk, arms folded, eyes watching Cassidy with the quiet patience of someone who's already lived through what's coming. There was no urgency, just inevitability. Like she knew where the road ended, but couldn't speak it aloud. Couldn't save her from it. Cassidy didn't ask questions. She just took the key, nodded once, and walked away. The hallways were different now. Lighter, not cheerful, never cheerful, but clearer. Like fog lifting just enough to see the road ahead. Guests moved like people again, not echoes. They smiled, even if their eyes were still swollen from crying. They whispered thanks. Some reached for her hand. Some left the building without saying anything, just stepping into the daylight like it might erase everything they'd been through. Maybe it would. Maybe it wouldn't. Cassidy no longer clung to answers. The motel wasn't about answers. It was about what you carried inside. And room 0 was the last weight she hadn't lifted. She walked the length of the east wing 3 times before she noticed it. A door that shouldn't have been there. Wider than the others. Taller, too. Painted the same tired beige as the rest. But something about it made the eye skip past it. Like it hid in plain sight. It had no number plate. No scuff marks on the floor in front. No dents in the frame. It didn't hum like the other rooms. It waited. Cassidy stopped. The key vibrated harder in her hand. She stepped forward and placed it in the lock. It turned without resistance. The door opened inward. Beyond it, nothing. Not darkness. Not light. Just space. It was impossible to tell how large the room was. There were no walls, no corners. Just a floor of smooth, black stone and a sense of depth so massive it made her stomach flip. She stepped through. The door didn't close behind her. It vanished. The moment she crossed the threshold, it ceased to exist. Cassidy stood still, heart pounding. A sound echoed in the distance. Not a whisper. Not footsteps. Breathing. Slow. Measured. Massive. The room, if that's what it even was, shuddered gently, like something slumbering in its depths had rolled over in sleep. And then came the voice. Not loud. Not cruel. A voice like memory spoken aloud for the first time in decades. You came. Cassidy didn't respond. She scanned the vastness, but saw nothing. You carried them all, the voice continued. The ones who were lost. The ones who forgot. The ones who couldn't speak. You remembered for them. I didn't do it alone, Cassidy said quietly. No, the voice agreed. But you're the only one who came here. The floor rippled beneath her feet, waves moving outward, as though she were standing on the surface of water, not stone. Cassidy closed her eyes. What is this place? The voice paused. Then the room before the first room. The silence before the echo. The memory of the motel itself. A shape formed ahead of her, far in the distance. Not approaching. Unfolding. Like something massive and ancient rising slowly from beneath the floor. It took form piece by piece. Not a creature. Not a person. A shape of thought. A collection of all things unsaid. Grief. Regret, loneliness. Longing. Every feeling that had nowhere else to live. Cassidy felt her knees weaken. Her hands trembled. Her heart raced so fast it felt like it might tear itself apart. She wasn't built to look at it. No one was. But she didn't look away. You've held them long enough, the voice said. She nodded, then let me put them down. Silence. Then the shape began to approach. It moved not by walking, but by becoming. Closer with every breath. Its form flickered. Her father's face. Her mother's silence. Her ex-husband's retreating back. Lee's tear-streaked cheeks. Simon's empty eyes. Jack's trembling hands. Eliza's hollow voice. All of them. Everyone. All of it became one. It stopped in front of her. Cassidy stood firm. You don't belong here, it said. Then send me back. I could keep you. I won't forget. It tilted its head. "What do you want, Cassidy Vale?" Her answer came without hesitation. "To be real." For a moment, the shape pulsed, writhing with what sounded like laughter. Not cruel, not mocking, delighted. "Then speak your name." She did. "Cassidy Vale." Again. "Cassidy Vale. I am still here." Louder. "Cassidy Vale?" The room shattered. Not with violence, but with release. Sound exploded around her. The sound of every unsaid word, every memory buried, every grief sealed in a locked drawer. It poured out in waves, heat and color, and sound crashing through her like fire, like truth. Cassidy fell to her knees, but did not break. She burned. When the light faded, she was alone. The room was gone. She stood in the center of the lobby again, the key still in her hand. Only now, the zero on it had turned into a circle. Complete. Whole. Finished. Behind her, the guest book closed on its own. Eliza stepped forward. "You found the source," she said. Cassidy nodded. "I think the motel is done holding." Eliza smiled. "Then maybe it's ready to let go." Cassidy looked around. The walls no longer whispered. The air no longer pulsed. The motel had finally exhaled. And for the first time since it was built, the Crestwood Inn was quiet. The silence felt unnatural, not oppressive, not haunted, just wrong in a way Cassidy couldn't place. After everything, after room 0, after the walls sighed out their pain, after the names had been spoken and the buried released, she thought peace would feel lighter, easier. But it didn't. It sat heavy in her chest like a stone with no clear purpose. The Crestwood Inn was quiet now, not asleep, not dead, waiting. Cassidy stood in the lobby for a long time, listening to the absence of sound. The vents no longer breathed. The lights no longer flickered. The guest book had stopped writing. Even the floor didn't creak. Everything was still. And that stillness wasn't peace, it was pause. The kind of pause that comes after a scream, when you're waiting to hear if the world answers back. Lee sat by the fireplace, legs folded beneath her, staring into cold ashes that hadn't burned in years. Eliza was gone again. Where, Cassidy couldn't say. Jack hadn't reappeared. The people who'd emerged from the rooms, the rescued, the remembered, they'd started to drift out in small groups. Some hugged her, some wept, some simply left. None of them looked back. Now, it was just Cassidy and the motel, and neither of them knew what came next. She found herself in the hallway without deciding to go there. Her feet carried her to room 1, then room 2, then past every place where she'd spoken. Listened, fought, endured. The memories weren't cruel anymore. They were present. Woven into the air like threads too fine to cut, she passed room 8 and paused. The door was closed, silent. At peace. Leah's father had never walked through that door, not in body, but the weight of him had been lifted, like smoke that finally knew it was time to rise. Room 9 was empty now, the light behind it gone. Cassidy had peeked in once after everything. Jack and Eliza were no longer there. Just a clean bed, folded sheets, no echoes, no faces in mirrors. It was like they'd stepped out of a story that had finally written its last line. But room 0. That door never returned. The space where it had been was now just blank wall. Smooth. Unmarked, like it had never existed. Cassidy touched the surface once, fingertips brushing paint that no longer remembered her. No pulse, no whisper, no hum. Still, she didn't like it. The quiet was too complete. That night, she dreamed. But the dream didn't belong to her. She was standing in the lobby again, but it wasn't ruined or old. It was new. Fresh paint, bright brass key hooks, the smell of pine cleaner in the air. People checked in at the desk, laughed, hugged. The kind of life the Crestwood hadn't known in decades. Cassidy turned and saw herself behind the desk. Younger, brighter. The version of her that had come here first, voice recorder in hand, chasing ghosts. She was smiling. But that smile faltered when the bell rang. The front door opened, and nothing stood there. Not a person, not a shadow, just a hole in the world, a space where sound died, a shape made of silence. And it stepped in. The guests didn't see it. The younger Cassidy didn't see it. Only she did, now, in the dream. The thing moved slowly, leaving no footprints, touching no surfaces, but wherever it passed, laughter stopped. Smiles froze. Conversations ended mid-sentence. A cold spread behind it, and then it turned, faceless, shapeless, but focused, on her. Even in the dream, Cassidy felt her throat lock. The silence looked at her and spoke without sound. "You took their grief. I gave it back," she said. "You named them. I remembered them. You forgot me." She woke choking. The room was dark. The walls were silent. But something had changed. The air was heavier. The silence was back, but not the same. Cassidy dressed quickly and made her way to the lobby. The guest book was open. A single page turned. And on it, scrawled in writing that didn't match anything she'd seen before, was a name, Nothing, room. Known time. Always Cassidy touched the ink. It was wet, fresh, still bleeding into the page like it had been written just now. She turned slowly, and the walls groaned. Not like they had before. Not old wood or settling dust. This was a warning, or a call. The motel hadn't finished. It had just paused. Cassidy stepped outside for the first time in days. The sun was out. The road was still. Birds chirped. But none of it felt right. The motel's shadow stretched long across the parking lot, reaching farther than it should. She turned back to the building. It loomed, taller than before. Somehow, a floor higher, a window where none had been. And above it all, above the peaked roofline, a new door, high, impossible, black as sleep. Room 0 had not disappeared, it had moved. Cassidy didn't speak, couldn't, not yet, because silence had come back, and this time, it was listening. The motel didn't sleep anymore. It waited. Cassidy could feel it in the walls again, faint at first, like a breath drawn in through clenched teeth. But the longer she stayed outside, the more she sensed it something had returned. Not the whispering walls or the vent sighs, not the mimicry of voices long gone. This was deeper, older, hungrier. It wasn't the past resurfacing. It was the void that had always existed beneath it, and it had remembered her name. She stood in the parking lot for an hour after seeing the new door above the roof. It didn't make sense. There were no stairs, no ladder, no architecture that allowed for a room to hang there, suspended in the sky like an accusation. It wasn't even part of the motel's body. It floated, silent and still, framed by nothing. A black door, no knob, no frame, just a rectangle of impossibility, and at its center, carved not with hands but with absence, was a single word, Nen-ing, the same name that had appeared in the guest book. Cassidy turned and walked back inside, the key from room 0 still tucked in her jacket. It buzzed now and then, unpredictable, like a heart murmur. She no longer knew if it belonged to her or to the motel. She crossed the lobby without looking at the desk. She didn't need the guest book anymore. It would write what it wanted, whether she watched or not. The hallways had changed again, not in shape or length, but in mood. Where there had been peace, now there was stillness too perfect. The kind of quiet that made your ears ring, that made your pulse feel loud. Cassidy saw it, in the way the doors sat too square in their frames, in the way the carpet didn't creak, in how the lights didn't flicker. They waited. Every inch of the crestwood was watching without blinking. She found Leah in room 3, sitting in the middle of the floor, eyes closed, whispering to herself. "Are you okay?" Cassidy asked. Lee opened her eyes. "It's awake again." Cassidy nodded slowly. "It's different this time. I know. It's not trying to hold us anymore. It's asking." Cassidy sat beside her. Asking what? If we didn't look at her. If we're ready to forget again. The silence between them was thick, and somewhere behind the walls, something creaked once. Not a settling sound. A deliberate one. Cassidy stood. "I think I need to go to it." "You can't," Lee said. "Not as you are. Then what do I need to be?" Lee looked up at her. Empty. Cassidy almost laughed. But the sound died before it reached her throat, because that was the price, wasn't it? The motel had been feeding off memories, regrets, voices, stories too painful to hold. And now, it wanted the opposite. It had eaten so much it needed balance. Now it craved silence again, not the passive kind, the willing kind. Cassidy walked through the inn like someone retracing her own footprints. The places that had hurt her were no longer cruel. But they weren't safe either. The echoes had been cleared, but in their absence, something darker had begun to pool in the corners. She saw it in reflections, movements that weren't hers, shadows bending around doorframes, shapes too big to belong to the bodies they followed. The motel had become a mirror of its guests, and Cassidy had become the brightest reflection of all. It wanted her back inside, not to harm her, to join her. That night, she stood in the field behind the building and stared up at the impossible door. It hovered just above the highest point of the roofline. Silent, imposing, waiting, and without warning, a ladder unfolded from the sky. Not metal, not wood, a ladder made of nothing. Each rung appeared as she reached for the one above, and so she climbed. She didn't speak. She didn't think. She climbed until the wind stopped, until the stars dimmed, until the motel below was no longer visible. Only that black door in front of her, smooth and flawless, radiating the same pulse she felt in her bones. She reached out. The key in her pocket turned warm, not hot, alive. She pulled it out. It no longer had the zero. It had no symbol at all. She touched the key to the door. It dissolved, and the door opened. Beyond it was not a room. It was a space between thoughts, a liminal echo of everything she hadn't said. It held no color, no texture, just silence so thick it had weight. Cassidy stepped in, and the door vanished behind her. The silence welcomed her, not with warmth or cruelty, but recognition. "You've carried voices," it said, "now carry none." Cassidy's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her thoughts slowed, her breath stilled, and the silence pressed closer. "You've named others," it said. "Now be nameless." She shook her head. It watched her. "You want to stay yourself," it said. Cassidy nodded. "You want to remember." She nodded again. Then the silence shuddered, and something broke inside it. Cassidy felt it ripple through her, not pain, not fear, but a deep, lonely surprise. "No one refuses me," it said. "I'm not no one," she whispered. And with that, the silence screamed, not in sound, in memory. It threw everything at her at once, the faces, the names, the grief. All of it in one crashing wave. It wanted to bury her in herself. But she stood firm, arms wide, heart open. She let it wash through her like a tide and kept standing. And the silence faltered. "You remember too much," it said. "I remember enough." The black space collapsed in a blink. Cassidy stood in the lobby again, breathless, sweaty, shaking, but alive, and herself. Behind her, the guest book fluttered open, a fresh page. One line, Cassidy Vale Room All, status keeper, and beneath it, in smaller ink, a second name. Nathemgi checked out. The door in the sky never appeared again. The silence retreated, and the Crestwood Motel exhaled. For real this time, Cassidy sat behind the desk and waited for the next name, because memory needed a place to land. And now, she was it. It didn't take long before the bell above the door rang again. Cassidy had been sitting behind the desk, her elbows resting on the polished wood, eyes fixed not on anything in the room but something deeper, an internal stillness, hard-earned and fragile. She hadn't expected anyone. After what had happened with the silence, nothing, whatever it was, she thought she might get a break. But the Crestwood didn't stop. It only changed its rhythm. The bell's ring was soft, not hesitant, not bold, just certain. Like the sound knew it belonged here. Cassidy looked up. The man who entered looked like he'd already been through something brutal before he ever stepped foot in the lobby. His suit was wrinkled and stained with something darker than coffee. His tie hung loose around his neck like a noose he hadn't quite decided to tighten. And his eyes, those were the worst part. Not wide, not wild, but flat. Lifeless in a way that said whatever had hollowed him out hadn't left anything behind worth repairing. Cassidy didn't speak. She waited. He approached the front desk, slow but direct, and placed a folded photograph on the counter. She didn't need to open it. She already knew what was inside. "My daughter," he said, voice like dry paper. "She's gone." Cassidy finally looked him in the eye. "You mean missing?" He shook his head. "No, gone. I buried her. I saw the casket go into the dirt. I know she's not coming back. But the problem is, she's still here." Cassidy blinked. "Here," he nodded. "In the dreams. In the corners. In the mirror. I see her, hear her, and not like a ghost, like she never left." That was when Cassidy understood. He wasn't here for grief. He was here because something in reality had split, and the crestwood had caught the tear. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Darren Ray." He looked exhausted just saying it, and hers. A pause. Then Mara. Cassidy opened the guest book. It had already written the name. Darren Ray, room 4. Status unspoken. She pushed the key toward him. "She's not gone, Darren. But she's also not what you remember. If you go into that room expecting her to be the same, it's going to hurt more than you're ready for." "I know," he said. She hesitated. "Do you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the key, turned, and walked down the hallway. Room 4 had been dormant for days. Long enough to start feeling like it had finally breathed out its last memory. But Cassidy had learned. Rooms didn't stay empty because they were finished. They stayed empty because they were waiting for the right shape of pain. Darren was that shape. She didn't follow. Not yet. Instead, she stayed at the desk, watching the hallway like it might swallow him whole. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Then the air in the lobby changed. Cold swept in from nowhere, and the light above the front desk flickered once, then stayed dim. Cassidy stood and moved to the hallway. When she reached room 4, the door was open a sliver. She pushed it wider. Darren was inside, kneeling on the floor, not crying, not speaking, just listening. And in front of him stood a girl, maybe 10. Brown hair tied in a crook braid, wearing the same dress from the photograph he'd brought. She smiled, but not like a memory, like a person. Cassidy felt the familiar pull in the air, the motel's attempt to mirror what someone had lost, to reassemble it from scraps of memory and yearning. But this wasn't a projection. This was Mara, the real one. Or at least what remained of her. Cassidy didn't step in. She watched. Darren reached forward, fingers trembling. "Mara," he whispered. The girl nodded. "I've been waiting," she said. "I saw you go," he choked out. "I watched them lower you down." "That wasn't me," she said, her voice soft, strange. He blinked. "What?" "That was what was left after I came here. I was already gone when the car hit. I don't know how. I just was." Cassidy's skin crawled. The motel had always drawn in those who were forgetting or forgotten. But this was new. This was something between life and death, something caught in the cracks of reality. The girl wasn't a memory. She was a presence. A piece of someone that had refused to move on. "You're real," Darren whispered. Mara tilted her head. "I'm here. That's all that matters." He sobbed once. Just once. Then collapsed into her, arms wrapping around air that somehow didn't resist. And Cassidy felt it. A shift. The room grew brighter. The walls sighed, like they were finally releasing pressure that had been building for years. Mara closed her eyes. "Now you can let me go." Darren held tighter. "I don't want to." "But you have to," she said. "I stayed for you. But I'm tired." He pulled back, tears streaking his face. "Will I ever see you again?" She smiled again, just faintly. "Every time you close your eyes and let it be quiet." And with that, she stepped back and vanished. No flicker, no sound, just gone. Darren crumpled to the floor, and the door shut gently on its own. Cassidy stood outside it, heart pounding, hands still on the knob, knowing this was the beginning of something different. The motel wasn't just holding grief anymore. It was releasing it. But release wasn't clean. It was messy, loud, painful. And whatever Mara had been, however she'd remained tethered, She was a signpost. There were more like her. People torn from the world but not yet past. Memories that had wait. Echoes that wanted to go. The Crestwood was changing, not closing, evolving. Cassidy returned to the desk. The guest book had a new entry: Mara Ray departed no room. No key, just light. And under it, one word: next. Cassidy didn't sleep that night. Not because the motel was stirring again, but because it wasn't. After Mara vanished, after Darren collapsed into that quiet place where all grief finally finds a bottom, everything just held still. The Crestwood didn't breathe. The vents didn't hum. Even the clock seemed unsure whether they should keep ticking. It was the kind of stillness that came before something new arrived, something that didn't belong to memory or sorrow, but to invasion. A kind of presence not formed by pain, but drawn to it. And when morning came, it knocked on the front door. Cassidy was behind the desk, sipping cold coffee, her eyes sunk deep into the guest book's pages, even though they hadn't turned in hours. The knock wasn't loud, just 2 sharp taps, almost polite, but it echoed far longer than it should have, bouncing down the halls, through the bones of the building, into places that hadn't opened in weeks. She stood up slowly. Another knock. This time, softer. She opened the front door. No one stood there. Not at first. Then, looking down, she saw the boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. Pale. Thin, dressed in a faded school uniform that looked out of time. His shoes were wet. His cheeks flushed, but not with life, with fever. His eyes were too large for his face. Not frightened, not angry. Just knowing. "Hello," he said quietly. Cassidy crouched. "Hi there. You okay?" "I came because you called," he said. "I didn't." "Yes, you did. When you let her go." "Mara." The boy nodded. "She made a space for me." Cassidy hesitated. "What's your name?" The boy looked past her through the doorway into the motel. "They called me Jonah." "But that's not who I was." The words chilled her blood. "What do you mean? I was many people before." But none of them remembered. Cassidy stood slowly. "Do you remember now?" He nodded once. "I remember all of them." The guest book fluttered behind her, pages turning wildly even without wind. She glanced over her shoulder, then back to him. "Who are you, really?" Jonah didn't blink. "I'm the one who didn't forget. Not ever. Not even when I died." Cassidy stepped aside and let him in. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the motel reacted. Lights flared. Doors cracked open without being touched. Room 5 moaned. Room 11 creaked. The entire west wing sighed, as if it had been holding a breath since before Cassidy had ever arrived. The boy didn't flinch. He just walked forward like he'd done this before. Like he belonged. And Cassidy, for the first time in a long time, felt afraid. Not because he was evil, but because he was true. The guest book slammed shut. Jonah turned toward her. "Do you know what the Crestwood was before?" he asked. "No," she admitted. He touched a wall. It vibrated gently beneath his fingers. It was a promise. That no one would be forgotten. That pain would have a room to wait in, safely, until someone could come and carry it away. Cassidy nodded. "That's what I've been doing." "But the problem," Jonah said, "is that you're not the first." She went still. "What do you mean?" "You're the latest." And with that, he walked down the main hallway, past every door like he knew each one by heart. Room 12 opened as he passed. Inside, Cassidy caught a glimpse of a nurse's uniform. A chair with restraints. Scraps of a journal nailed to the ceiling. Jonah didn't stop. Room 7 creaked open next. Inside, blood smeared on the carpet. A crib, a mobile still turning. Cassidy's breath caught in her throat. "Jonah?" He stopped in front of Room Zoe's old place, the blank wall. He raised one hand and knocked 3 times. And the wall replied. Not with sound, with memory. The paint peeled back like skin. The seams reappeared. A handle rose out of the grain like it had always been there. And slowly, the door to Room 0 returned. Jonah turned to face her. "I can open it now." All the way. Cassidy's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you want to?" He smiled, and it was the saddest smile she had ever seen on a child. Because there's something on the other side of it that remembers me. The door opened, not into blackness, into light, a hallway narrow and clean, white walls, warm glow, like a hospital or a dream. Cassidy stepped closer. What's in there? Jonah looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes shimmered with tears. My mother. He stepped in. The door didn't close. Cassidy hesitated, then followed. The hallway stretched longer the farther they walked. But it didn't feel wrong. It felt designed. At the end of it, a woman sat in a chair, facing a window that looked out over nothing. Jonah ran to her. She turned, startled. Her hands flew to her mouth, and Cassidy knew, before the woman even whispered his name, that she had forgotten him. She had gone mad from grief. Institutionalized, erased the memory of the child she lost because it was too much. Buried his name, his face, his everything. But the Crestwood hadn't. And Jonah, whatever part of him had stayed tethered, had waited. Now, she remembered, she wept, held him, whispered apologies, and the light grew brighter, not blinding, just real. Cassidy stepped back as the room faded. Jonah turned to her one last time. Thank you, he said, for making room. And then they were gone. No door, no sound, just peace. And back in the lobby, the guest book wrote only this: Jonah returned. Cassidy sat down, tears drying on her cheeks. And somewhere far beneath the motel, in the bones of the building, in the memories that were no longer forgotten, the silence sighed. It wasn't hungry anymore. It was healing. Rain came that night. Not the kind that knocked on the roof and lulled you to sleep, but the kind that felt like it had a purpose. Sharp. Cold. Soaking into the ground like it was looking for something buried. Cassidy sat by the front desk, lights dim, the air heavy with the scent of water and the faint perfume of dust rising from floorboards that hadn't been touched in days. The guest book stayed closed. The Crestwood was quiet, holding its breath again. But this time, the stillness wasn't expectant. It was wary. Something was coming. Cassidy felt it first in her chest. A pressure. Not pain exactly, just a presence. Like someone had placed a hand inside her and was waiting for her to notice. She straightened in her chair. The lobby lights flickered once, then twice, then stayed dim. A car engine groaned in the distance and died before reaching the lot. No tires on gravel, no footsteps outside, just that presence, growing heavier with every second. Then, at exactly midnight, the bell above the front door rang. It startled her more than it should have, because she hadn't heard the door open. She hadn't seen it move. But the bell rang all the same, and standing there, perfectly still, was a man, not soaked from the rain, not windblown, just dry, like the storm had bent around him. Cassidy stood slowly. "Good evening," she said, her voice low. The man didn't respond. He was dressed plainly, gray coat, dark slacks, black shoes too polished for the weather. He looked like he could have been 50 or 70. His face was smooth but tired, his eyes wrong, not empty, not malicious, just absent, like something had been erased behind them. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, instinctively reaching for the guest book. He smiled, faintly. "Not exactly." She hesitated. "Name?" He stepped forward, his shoes making no sound on the floor. He placed a small, black envelope on the counter, sealed. No stamp, no handwriting. Cassidy picked it up carefully and turned it over. "Nothing." She looked back at him. "What's this?" "You'll know when it's time." The envelope felt warm, familiar in a way that made her stomach turn. She opened it. Inside was a single page, blank on one side. On the other, a printed newspaper clipping. Musazine Wongoman Fan and DDER Siras Dedua Marial Phona Piawai Suspected. There was a photo beneath the headline. Cassidy, younger, tired, pale. Taken years ago. She read it again. Her hands began to tremble. "I don't. This isn't. I never checked in," the man said softly. "But I was always here." Cassidy looked up. He was gone. No door slam. No footsteps. No trace of him. Just the lingering cold that followed him in. She turned the clipping over again and again, But there was nothing else on the page. No article text, no date, just her name, her face, her death. And suddenly, Cassidy felt something snap loose inside the crestwood. A hinge in the ceiling groaned. The floor beneath the desk shifted. The guest book flipped open on its own. Its ink bled across the page like it had been stabbed. UNSKNTEST status unknown. Cassidy ran to the front door and flung it open. The parking lot was empty. The rain was gone. The road stretched out forever. And on the other side of the glass, her reflection wasn't looking back. She blinked. Her reflection's eyes, were focused down the hall, not at her, and the reflection smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. She backed away from the door. Something in the building shifted again. Behind her, a door slammed. Not one of the guest rooms. The basement. Cassidy turned toward it, breath coming faster. The stairs that led below, the same ones she'd taken weeks ago into the mirror room, the memory chamber, the foundation of the motel's grief, were darker now. They pulsed not with sorrow, but with uncertainty. She had cleared the names, freed the forgotten, even faced the silence itself. But there had always been a gap, a detail she hadn't asked. How had she ended up here in the first place? Not the motel. She remembered arriving with her voice recorder, her grief, her mission. But before that, before she ever found the crestwood, Cassidy descended the stairs, one by one. The deeper she went, the colder the air became. She found the memory chamber again. Only this time, the mirrors were broken. All of them, shattered from the inside. Glass covered the floor in jagged sheets. Her reflection flickered in 1,000 sharp angles, each one showing a different version of her, alive, dead, young, old, screaming, laughing, empty. In the center of the room sat the black envelope again. Whole, sealed. But now it had something written on it. A return address, THEONIOHO Cam Basika Ranj. Cassidy picked it up, and the moment she did, the door behind her slammed shut and locked. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the motel's grief anymore. This was hers. And it wasn't done with her yet. The black envelope weighed heavier than it should have. Cassidy held it in her hands like a loaded question, her fingers trembling, her mouth dry. The return address burned itself into her eyes even though it was only ink TOTHEONUBHO CAM BACKW RONG. The words rang louder than any scream the motel had thrown at her. Not just because they were strange or ominous, but because they felt like truth. She hadn't come back wrong. She hadn't come back at all. She looked up. The shattered mirrors around the room didn't reflect her correctly anymore. Some didn't reflect her at all. One version of her stood still with hollow eyes. Another wept silently. One of them bled from the mouth, her skin pale as wax. And one, just one, wasn't looking at her. It was looking past her, into something Cassidy couldn't see. That was the version she feared the most. She opened the envelope again. This time, the inside was different. Not a newspaper clipping. A photograph. Not of her, but of the motel, only it was on fire, windows cracked, smoke billowing, flames devouring the porch. A twisted figure barely visible in the flames, running toward the woods. And beneath the image, in jagged writing, you were in there when it happened. You didn't walk out. You just kept going. Cassidy felt the floor beneath her shift. Not physically, not in the building. Inside her. Something had slipped sideways in her memory. A corner peeled back. I didn't leave, she whispered. The lights above the mirrors flickered once, then blazed white. Cassidy dropped the envelope and stumbled backward. The mirrors hummed. And from the shattered glass came a sound she hadn't heard in years. Her own voice. From a recording. I'm standing inside the Crestwood Motel. It's just past midnight. There's no one else here. I think something's wrong with the walls. It was her first tape. The one she'd recorded when she thought this place was just haunted, not hungry. She remembered the fear in her voice back then. The way she kept looking over her shoulder, the nervous laugh, she remembered it like a scar. But the voice didn't stop. It kept playing. And it kept changing, as if each version of her had recorded something different. There's something in the walls. I don't know if I'm dreaming or dead. If anyone hears this, I think I've been here before. Cassidy fell to her knees. The voices tangled over one another, looping and warping, a dozen versions of herself layered into a choir of doubt. Then, silence, and a single line, not from her, from someone else. A man's voice. Calm. Low. You died in room 13. Cassidy, you just forgot. Her hands went numb. Room 13 didn't exist. There had never been a room 13 in the Crestwood. Not on the key rack. Not in the blueprints. It had been skipped, like most motels did for superstition. Except it hadn't been skipped. It had been erased. She stood slowly, glass crunching beneath her shoes, her pulse thundering in her ears. There had never been a guest from room 13. No complaints. No voices. Because the room didn't hold pain. It held her. A place where the story ended. A door that should never be opened, because it already had been. She climbed the stairs from the basement, like someone carrying a body on their back. The motel felt different now, heavier, darker. The walls didn't whisper. They didn't need to. They were listening, waiting, watching her. The hallway was empty. But now there was a door she hadn't seen before, between room 12 and the blank wall where room 0 once appeared. A single door, no number, no handle, just a black slit. She reached out, and her hand passed through it, not like smoke, not like mist, like memory. Like stepping through the moment before a scream. She pushed forward. The hallway behind her collapsed into nothing. Cassidy was now standing in a room with no walls, no ceiling, just echoes of herself. And in the center, a burned bed, a melted nightstand, charred wallpaper, and a body, not fresh, not whole, blackened bone, clothes she recognized. A wristwatch she'd worn that night, the last night she'd truly remembered being alive. Cassidy dropped to her knees. She couldn't scream. There was nothing left to scream with. This was room 13. This was where she died. And the motel had never told her. Because it hadn't wanted her to leave. The figure across the room stepped out of the shadows. The man from the lobby. Dry. Silent. Eyes like static. I tried to warn you, he said. Who are you? Cassidy asked, her voice breaking. The one who died before you. The one who stayed. They buried me in the walls. Why didn't you leave? He smiled. I forgot who I was. And by the time I remembered, the room wouldn't let me go. He pointed at her. You still have a chance, but not if you keep pretending you're alive. Cassidy looked down at the body. At her own body. And something in her broke. Not in fear, not in grief. In acceptance. I didn't make it out. No, the man said. But your voice did. And that was the truth. She had recorded her story. She had listened to others. She had carried their grief, their pain, their memories, because she no longer had anywhere else to carry her own. The room began to fade, not dissolve. Close. Room 13 had finally been seen. And it was done hiding. Cassidy stood, looked one last time at the body on the floor, then turned and walked through the black slit behind her, into the Crestwood, into herself. And this time, she knew the truth. She had never survived the fire. She had just kept moving through it. The motel was listening now, not like before, not the passive listening of walls that soak in pain and let it echo later. This was different. Active. Attentive. Every footstep Cassidy took down the hallway was followed by a hush, as if the air itself leaned closer to hear what she'd do next. She no longer wondered what the Crestwood was. Not a motel. Not exactly. Not anymore. It had become something else entirely, an aftershock of forgotten grief, stitched together by memories that refused to die. And now that Cassidy knew her own death, the place seemed satisfied, not peaceful. Just alert, as though the final secret had been spoken aloud, and it was waiting for the next chapter to begin. She returned to the lobby with legs that no longer felt fully her own. Her limbs carried her like someone newly born, but backwards, out of fire, into silence. The guest book was open when she reached the desk. She hadn't left it that way. But it had written something across both pages, long looping letters that bled ink into the paper like veins across skin. You are now part of the walls. You are no longer a guest. You are the keeper. Cassidy stared at the words for a long time. Her fingers hovered just above them, as if touching the ink might trap her inside it. She didn't need the book to tell her what she'd become. She felt it. In her spine. In her breath. The motel had folded her into itself like a lung pulling in air it would never release. It didn't want her gone. It wanted her to hold. To preserve. To remember. But what was left to remember? The stories were winding down. The lost had been found. The doors had quieted. Even room 0 had gone still. There were no more screams. No more cold spots or flickering lights. But Cassidy knew better. Stillness in the Crestwood didn't mean peace. It meant something was being held in place. She paced the lobby, looking for signs of what came next. Rain had returned, but soft now. A gentle tapping on the windows like fingernails against glass. The wind had stopped. The air outside was hushed, like the entire world beyond the gravel lot had faded into a single breath before sleep. That's when she heard it. A sound she hadn't heard in days. A voice, but not from down the hallway. Not from behind a door. From inside the walls. It was a whisper, barely there. A child's voice. Sad, slow, repeating the same phrase over and over like a broken lullaby. Don't forget. Don't forget. Don't forget. Cassidy followed the sound. Her hand grazed the wallpaper as she moved along the hallway. Fingers tracing the voice like a thread. It pulled her past room 9, past room 3, to a place where the corridor narrowed unnaturally. It was a section of the motel that shouldn't exist, wedged between rooms, too small to be a real space, too tight to walk comfortably. But the whisper came from beyond the wall there. She placed her palm flat against it, and the wall breathed back. Don't forget, it whispered again. Cassidy closed her eyes and pressed harder. The wall opened, not like a door, not like a secret passage. It peeled slow and soundless, revealing a narrow hallway she'd never seen. The walls inside were darker, painted a shade of gray that seemed to soak in light. No fixtures, no switches, only a door at the far end. A plaque above it read, "I.S. Tunningram." She stepped through, and the moment she entered, the motel shut behind her. The door vanished, gone like breath in cold air. Cassidy didn't panic, she just walked. Every footstep echoed like a heartbeat. The listening room wasn't big, it was just long, and the walls were lined with speakers, hundreds of them, each one dusty, cracked, ancient. All different makes and models, radios, intercoms, gramophones. Each one pointed inward, toward the center of the room, where a single chair sat, facing a reel-to-reel tape machine. Cassidy approached slowly. The machine wasn't plugged in, but it hummed. The tape inside it began to spin as she reached out, and a voice played. Not hers, someone else. A woman, breathless, crying. They told me I could speak here, that someone would listen. I don't know if you're real, but I need someone to remember me. I died in 1971. Room 6, no one claimed my body. I was never on the news. Just gone. I don't want to be gone anymore. The tape clicked. The next one started. Room 11, 1984. My wife never came looking for me. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she didn't want to. I just want to say goodbye. Click. Room 2, 1999. I was running. That's all. I didn't think I'd be followed. I didn't think they'd find me. But they did. And now I'm here. If anyone ever hears this, tell my sister I didn't stop loving her. Cassidy listened for hours. Maybe days. Time had no meaning in the listening room. Only voices. She cried more than once. Not because the stories were sad, though they were, but because they were real. Unclaimed people, unspoken losses, unrecorded deaths. The Crestwood had given them one last room, a place to be heard. And now it had given Cassidy the key. She sat in the chair and finally spoke. My name is Cassidy Vale. I came here chasing ghosts. I thought I was the one collecting stories. I thought I was alive, but I wasn't. I was the echo, not the voice. She reached toward the machine, pressed record, and now I'm the one listening. The tape spun, and the speakers all around her began to whisper back. Voices she'd never met, voices long gone, voices who had waited. And Cassidy heard them, all of them, because that's what she was now. Not a savior, not a hunter, not even a keeper. She was the room, and the room never forgot. Cassidy didn't leave the listening room right away. She wasn't sure she could. The voices had sunk into her skin, into her bones. They looped and layered in her mind long after the reel stopped spinning, even after the last whisper dissolved into the stale, humid air. Each voice had shape now, texture. She could see their faces behind her eyes. People who had died nameless, unloved, unheard. The Crestwood had been the final word on their lives, and Cassidy, somehow, had become their last echo. When the door finally reappeared behind her, she walked through it without hesitation. The hallway outside welcomed her like an old friend who no longer had to hide its true face. Gone were the sharp angles, the uneven lighting, the trickling shadows. Everything was still, quiet, aware. The motel wasn't just watching her anymore. It was thinking about her. Not as a visitor, not as prey, but as something it had dreamed into being. As she passed by the rooms, she realized the doorknobs turned slowly, just slightly, at her presence. Not to open, not to invite, but to acknowledge. They remembered her now. Not just the Cassidy who walked in weeks ago, alive and looking for closure. They remembered all of her, every version, every death, every room that held her shadow. Then she noticed something impossible. Her room had changed. The door that had once been labeled Room 1 now read, Cassidy, nothing else. No number. No status. Just her name. She approached it, unsure whether to open it or walk past. Her fingers hovered above the knob, uncertain. When the door opened on its own, not wide, just enough for her to look inside. What she saw chilled her. It was her childhood bedroom. Not a perfect replica, not some distorted echo. It was her room, right down to the dent in the closet door. The faded poster of a band she hadn't thought of in decades. The bedspread with the worn threads where her cat used to sleep. She stepped inside. It smelled like home. Not the idea of home, her home. Old shampoo. Dust. The faint trace of summer sweat. And on the bed sat a cassette recorder, one of the old ones. The kind she used to use to record pretend radio shows when she was 9. She picked it up, pressed play, and heard her own voice. But it wasn't recent. It was a child's voice. Her voice. I'm going to remember everything when I grow up. I'm not going to forget like Mom does. I won't pretend like things didn't happen. I'll keep all the stories safe, even the scary ones. The tape stopped. Cassidy sat down slowly, eyes stinging. The Crestwood hadn't built this room to trap her. It had built it to remind her. This had always been her. The listener, the recorder, the keeper of stories no one else wanted to carry. Even as a child, she'd known the weight of silence, of things left unsaid. Now she carried the voices of the dead, but she'd always been doing it in smaller ways. That's why the motel had kept her. Not because she died in it, because she fit it. She belonged. Somewhere behind her, the door creaked open again. A draft pushed through the room, carrying the scent of rain and cigarette smoke. She turned. There was no one there. But the hallway had changed again. A new door had appeared near the end. It was smaller than the others, low to the ground. It bore no name. Just a carving THEDREMI, and Rome Cassidy stepped out of her bedroom, heart heavy but steady. She followed the curve of the hallway toward the new door. As she moved, each room she passed flickered like an old television tuning between channels. She caught glimpses. One moment a burned mattress. The next a birthday party frozen in time. Then a man screaming into a mirror that didn't show his reflection. The rooms were remembering, but not in pain, in dreams. Cassidy reached the door. The knob was made of bone. She turned it. Inside was a room built from thought. It shifted with each step she took. Sometimes a forest, sometimes a hospital room, sometimes a church basement lit by flickering candles. No matter where she turned, the room changed to match something deep in her subconscious. Fears, longings, memories she'd buried even from herself. In the center of the ever-shifting space stood a tall, rectangular mirror. Cassidy approached it. And for the first time in the Crestwood, her reflection matched her completely. No lag, no distortion, just her. But behind her, inside the mirror, 1,000 doors stood, each one open just a crack, each one with someone watching. The voices came again, all at once, not screaming, not begging, speaking. I died here. So did I. I forgot my name. I never got to say goodbye. I wasn't supposed to be alone. I thought someone would come. And then, you did. Cassidy's hand touched the glass. It was warm. The room stilled. The doors behind her reflection closed one by one, softly, lovingly, like someone tucking memories into bed. The final voice whispered, "Now we can rest." The glass rippled once, and Cassidy saw her own face smile. But it wasn't her smile. It was the motel's, grateful. And then the mirror vanished. The room fell dark. Only one door remained now. Straight ahead, unmarked. She stepped toward it, heart heavy with every story she'd held. And she knew, before she touched the handle, what waited beyond it. Not an ending. A decision. The Crestwood had shown her everything. Her death, her past, the voices, the pain. Now it waited. Would she stay? Would she become part of it forever? Or walk out and leave it behind? The knob turned easily under her hand, and beyond the door was light. The light was not blinding. It didn't explode into Cassidy's vision or sear her thoughts with divine clarity. It was soft, amber-hued, like the warmth behind closed eyelids on a summer morning. A light you could walk toward without shielding your eyes. But it didn't promise escape. It offered choice, and Cassidy knew the difference now. The Crestwood hadn't kept her prisoner. It had kept her unfinished. All its winding corridors and shifting walls, its haunted rooms and forgotten guests, had been mirrors held up to her. Now, with her hand still on the final door's handle, she stood at the threshold not of freedom, but of understanding. And choice. One she hadn't been ready for, until now. Behind her, the Crestwood had gone quiet again. Not in dread, not in grief, but the stillness of a house that has finally told its story and waits for someone to turn the last page. The floor didn't creak beneath her anymore. The air didn't buzz with electricity. Even the guest book at the front desk, miles away through a maze of memory and silence, had stopped flipping pages. The motel was watching her. But it wasn't pleading. It was accepting. Cassidy took one step into the light. The hallway she entered didn't belong to the motel. Not quite. It was neither new nor old. It felt imagined. A clean space carved out from the void that lived between what we remember and what we choose to forget. The walls were blank, smooth as paper. They held no stories yet. It reminded her of the first time she'd picked up a recorder, long before the Crestwood. Long before the first whisper found her in the dark. Back when she'd been just a girl with a voice and an ache to keep things from disappearing. She walked slowly. Her footsteps made no sound. The hall ended in a small alcove, circular like the inside of a clock. In the center stood a chair, simple, wooden, untouched, and in front of it a table. On the table sat 3 objects: a single white key, a fresh guest book, and her old recorder. The sight of it struck her like a slap to the chest. It was the same one she'd carried all those months ago when she first arrived at the Crestwood, chasing rumors and death. Scratched. Scarred, but whole. Cassidy approached. The recorder flicked on without her touching it, and a voice played. Her voice, but younger, softer, less guarded. "If you're hearing this, then I guess you made it through. Or maybe I didn't. I don't know which one of us is left. But I need to say this anyway." She swallowed, sitting in the chair before her legs gave out. I came here because I thought I was chasing ghosts. But I was only ever chasing myself. I was the one who needed to be found. And now that I've heard every voice, carried every name, I finally understand." The voice paused, then returned, steadier. "It was never about saving anyone. It was about listening. Because when we listen, really listen, we become the thing that survives." Cassidy let the recorder fall silent. She looked down at the white key. There was no number on it, no room, just her initials CV. If she took the key, she would stay, not as a guest, not even as the keeper, but as something more permanent, a part of the place itself. She would become the foundation of memory that held the others afloat. The Crestwood would remember through her, speak through her, endure through her. If she walked away without taking it, the motel would close, truly close. The rooms would seal, the voices would fade, the silence would return, and her story would end. Cassidy looked into the light beyond the table. It pulsed gently, waiting no answers, just peace. And for the first time, Cassidy allowed herself to think not about what the right choice was, but what she wanted. To carry the weight forever, to become the last room in the motel, or to let go, let it all go. She reached out. Fingers hovered above the key, then closed, but not around the key, around the recorder. She stood up, taking it with her. She left the key behind, and as she turned, walking toward the light, the hallway behind her began to crack, not violently, not with sound, but like fading breath. The table, the chair, the guest book, the key, all dimmed, softened, and disappeared into dust. The motel didn't cry out, it simply closed its eyes. Cassidy passed through the final veil of light and found herself in the woods. Real trees, real dirt, real night sky above her head. No doors, no echoes, just wind in the branches and the smell of rain still clinging to the ground. Her recorder was warm in her hand. She hit the red button, held it to her lips, and spoke. "This is Cassidy Vale. I was dead. But now, I remember." She clicked it off, slipped it into her coat pocket, and began to walk. Behind her, where the Crestwood once stood, there was nothing now. Just fog, and quiet, and the faint, fading memory of a door that waited a very long time to finally close. Cassidy didn't look back, not because she was afraid of what she'd see, but because there was nothing left to see. The Crestwood was gone. Not burned or crumbled or buried beneath rubble, just erased. As if it had unthreaded itself from the fabric of the world the moment she stepped into the trees. And yet, as her feet moved over the uneven ground and branches brushed her arms, she could still feel its presence, like heat lingering long after the fire goes out. It hadn't vanished, it had gone quiet. And maybe, in some impossible place behind her, it was sleeping now, dreaming of her. She didn't know where she was going. The woods were unfamiliar, not part of any map she'd ever studied before. No paths, no signs, no sounds but the low wind and the occasional rustle of something unseen. But Cassidy walked without fear. For the first time in what felt like years, maybe it had been years, she didn't feel the need to chase, to record, to unravel pain like thread from a spool. The silence wasn't a threat anymore. It was earned. Still, the recorder in her coat pocket was warm, still full, still alive in some way. She reached for it once, then stopped. Not yet. The stories she carried weren't hers to release until she found the right place. Until someone asked to hear them. She came to a clearing just before dawn. Pale light filtered through the trees. A fog lay low to the ground, curling around her boots like something alive but gentle. There was a bench in the middle of the clearing, old, wooden, too out of place to have been left by accident. Cassidy sat. The wood creaked under her weight, but held. She listened. And that's when she noticed it. Faint, far, but growing, whispers. Not loud, not desperate, not the cold voices of the Crestwood. These were softer, curious, a little sad. Like someone calling your name in a dream you forgot the moment you woke. She stood and turned in place. There was no one, yet they came all the same. words she'd heard before, phrases recorded in the motel, voices once trapped behind mirrors, beneath floorboards, inside vents. But now, they weren't trapped. They were drifting, set free. Cassidy pulled the recorder from her pocket and pressed play, and the whispers quieted, replaced by one voice. Hers, the last thing she'd recorded before she stepped through the final door. "This is Cassidy Vale. I was dead. But now I remember." She hit stop, and the clearing shifted, not visibly, not physically, but deeply. The fog pulled back, and a small building revealed itself just beyond the tree line. It wasn't the Crestwood, not even close. A small cabin, weathered, shingled roof, smoke curling from the chimney. The windows glowed amber with the soft suggestion of firelight. A porch swing moved slowly, not from wind, but from memory. Cassidy approached with cautious awe. There was a plaque by the door, half buried in moss. She knelt and brushed it clean. 3 words were carved into the wood: "The last stay." She stood, knocked, once, twice, no answer. She opened the door anyway. Inside was a single room, a fireplace, a desk, a shelf filled with blank tapes, a cot in the corner, and on the desk a new recorder, not hers. This one was clean, untouched. Waiting, Cassidy stepped forward, drawn like a tide. A note was taped beside it. "You remembered. Now you can help others remember too." She didn't need to ask who left it. She knew. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was all of them. The ones who whispered. The ones who waited. She sat at the desk, picked up the fresh recorder, pressed record, and spoke welcome. "If you're hearing this, it means you've forgotten something. Maybe everything. That's okay. That's what this place is for. Sit. Stay a while. Let the quiet come back." She placed the recorder back on the desk, left it playing, and stepped outside again into the light of a world that didn't know her yet, but might, someday. She would walk the edge of this world now, not haunting, not hunted, just listening, because she wasn't running anymore. She was ready. And the last day had many more guests to come. The sun had crept halfway over the horizon by the time Cassidy left the cabin. Her breath clouded in the morning chill, but she didn't shiver. Her body felt lighter now, as though the weight she'd carried inside the Crestwood had melted away. But that wasn't entirely true. She still carried something. Not the motel itself, not the burden of its rooms, or the voices it held, but something deeper. Something stranger. She was no longer entirely a person. Not in the way the world had once defined it. She was an echo now. A living one. A memory that had chosen to keep walking, and the world noticed. It began with the trees. As she moved through the forest, they leaned slightly toward her, branches angling as if to catch the vibrations she gave off. Animals watched from the underbrush but didn't flee. Even the wind shifted when she passed, curling behind her ears, pulling her forward. There were no signs to follow, but Cassidy didn't need direction. Her steps were drawn toward a place she hadn't known existed, but that had been waiting for her all the same. Some magnet in the fabric of loss pulling her toward the next forgotten story. By midday, she emerged from the woods and found a road. Not paved, not modern, a narrow strip of worn asphalt, cracked and choked with weeds. The kind of road people stopped using when time forgot the towns it led to. Cassidy followed it. She passed rusted fences, barns swallowed by ivy, houses with curtains still drawn even though their windows were broken. She knew the signs. This wasn't just decay. This was absence. Somewhere nearby, something had been forgotten so thoroughly it had unraveled from memory itself. That's where she was needed. By dusk, she reached the edge of a town. It had no name on the sign, just a faded welcome board, splintered and half sunk into the ground. Behind it, a cluster of buildings stood in that particular kind of stillness that only exists when no one has spoken aloud in years. Cassidy stepped into the main street. Her boots echoed off cracked concrete. The town was empty, but not abandoned. The difference was subtle. One meant people had fled. The other meant people had been taken. She passed a diner, its neon sign still flickering weakly. A hardware store with the door slightly ajar, a post office with letters still in the window slots. But there were no sounds, no birds, no bugs, not even wind, just that weightless hush, like the town was holding its breath. She stopped in front of a 2-story house on the corner, white paint peeling. Porch steps slanted. The door was open, swinging gently though the air was still. Cassidy stepped inside. The interior was preserved like a museum exhibit. Coat still hanging by the door. Mug half full of something blackened with mold. Radio on the table. Silent but plugged in. A picture frame face down on the floor. She picked it up. Inside was a photograph, 2 people smiling, a man and a girl. Cassidy studied the image. Something itched in the back of her mind. Not familiarity exactly, but recognition. A tone, a feeling. She flipped the frame over. A name etched in pencil on the back, Eden. Her heart skipped. She hadn't heard that name in years. Not since the final tape she'd cataloged before her journey began. The one she never released. A girl named Eden who called in from a town no one could place. Said her father had disappeared after seeing something in a mirror. Said no one believed her. Then silence. No more messages. She'd been logged as lost. Cassidy's hand tightened around the recorder in her coat pocket. She stepped deeper into the house. Upstairs, the hallway was coated in dust. Doors stood open, leading into rooms full of decaying toys, beds still made, a toothbrush still laid across the sink like its owner had left mid-routine. In the last room, the walls were covered in tape. Literal tape. Cassette reels, strung from corner to corner like cobwebs. Hundreds of them, stretched tight, humming faintly as if vibrating with sound no longer meant for ears. And in the middle of the room sat a child-sized chair. Empty, facing a wall-sized mirror. Cassidy approached slowly. The mirror was unbroken. But it didn't reflect her. It reflected Eden, the girl from the photograph. Sitting in the chair, mouth open, eyes hollow, and speaking. Cassidy reached out. The mirror grew warm beneath her palm. Eden's voice began to bleed through. He said he'd come back. He said the motel would remember. But it forgot. It forgot us both. Cassidy's breath caught. This wasn't just another echo. It was a trap. The Crestwood hadn't been the only place that fed on forgotten pain. Something else lived here. Something older. A place that didn't want to be heard. It wanted to consume silence. Cassidy looked into the mirror again. Eden looked back. But her mouth wasn't moving anymore. Her eyes, though. They pleaded. Cassidy pulled out her recorder, pressed record, and whispered, "I remember you, Eden. I heard your message, and I'm here." The mirror cracked. Just once. A single fracture down the center. Eden blinked. And for a moment, Cassidy saw her truly. Not as a ghost. Not as a victim. But as a girl who had waited too long to be believed. The reels in the room snapped, all at once, fluttering to the floor like ribbons cut by unseen scissors. The house groaned. Cassidy stepped back. Eden's image faded. The mirror went dark, and a whisper filled the room, not from the walls, not from the town, but from below. It said only one word more. Cassidy turned and walked out of the house. Her recorder was still warm in her hand. The town wasn't done. Whatever had taken Eden's voice had taken others, and she would find them. Because she was no longer just a voice that listened. She was the echo that walked. Cassidy moved through the silent town with a strange sense of urgency, though nothing pursued her. The houses stood still, unmoving shadows against a sky darkening into a deep, bruise-colored twilight. Street lamps stood hollow, glass long since shattered, poles leaning like wary watchers who'd stopped keeping count. The words spoken in the upstairs room still echoed in her mind more. Not a threat, not a plea, a truth. Something had been buried here, deliberately forgotten, unspoken, sealed in a place even memory was too afraid to go. Cassidy knew that tone, the same way a deep breath knows when it's about to become a scream. She headed toward the center of town, drawn now by more than curiosity, The ground felt off beneath her boots, not hollow, not cracked, just wrong. It gave a little too much with every step, not soft like mud, spongy, like walking on layered cloth soaked in something long dried. The storefronts she passed were ruined, but not randomly. Glass shattered in patterns, furniture overturned with purpose, as if someone had been looking for something, or hiding it. A weathered building caught her attention. It wasn't the biggest or the most ruined, but the way it leaned slightly to one side felt unnatural, wrong in the way a smile looks when it's held too long. A broken sign hung above the door, its paint peeled until only faint lettering remained, CITY Hail. Cassidy stepped inside. It smelled like mildew and ink. Dust hovered in the air in a way that made it feel alive. The room was filled with filing cabinets, some open, most sealed shut with layers of rust. Papers lay scattered across the floor, old enough to crumble at the touch. And in the far corner, a staircase leading down into black. She didn't hesitate. She knew the most important stories are the ones that end up buried. The basement air was thick, not just with dampness, but with something heavier, like the air itself didn't want to be disturbed. Cassidy turned on her recorder, not to speak, but to let it listen. Down here, words didn't want to be spoken, they wanted to be heard first. The basement opened into a low, arched chamber. Ceiling curved like the inside of a skull. It was filled with shelves. Rows and rows of them, lined with thick, leather-bound books. Each one labeled with a year. But they didn't stretch far back like she expected. They stopped abruptly. The last shelf bore only 2 books, both identical, both stamped with the same year, 1972. Cassidy pulled one down. Inside were names, handwritten, each one followed by a room number. Each name crossed out in red ink. She flipped through the book, page after page of marked names, all bearing the same fate. But halfway through, she stopped. There was a torn page. Only one name had been written there. Eden Harper, room 6, not crossed out, not labeled, just alone, like someone had started to forget her, then stopped. Cassidy reached for the second book. It was blank, every page, except one. In the center, her own name. Cassidy Vale, unknown, room status incomplete. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't written it. The ink was old, faded, as if it had been waiting for her to find it. A record of a life that had almost vanished, but hadn't. She heard a sound behind her. Not loud. A click. Then a voice, low and rusted, "You weren't supposed to open that." Cassidy turned slowly. A figure stood at the edge of the stairs. Not shadowed, not cloaked. A man, dressed in an old clerk's uniform, tie askew, badge half peeled from his lapel. His face was blurred, not by shadow, not by movement, but by forgetting. Like the world had tried to erase him 1 inch at a time and given up halfway through. He stepped forward. "Names stay where they're placed," he said. "That's how we keep the silence in order." Cassidy closed the book gently. "Who placed mine?" He tilted his head. "You did," and she remembered. The moment before she'd first stepped into the Crestwood. Not her arrival, but her choice. To document. To chase. To remember the ones who couldn't remember themselves. She had written her name in the silence. Given it to the motel. Willingly. But the man wasn't finished. "You weren't supposed to leave," he said, voice crackling. "None of them were." Cassidy stood her ground. "I didn't leave. I just kept going." The lights above them flickered. The bookshelves began to tremble. Something beneath the floor groaned. "You unstitched the silence," he said, "and now it's coming apart." Cassidy stepped past him, up the stairs, clutching both books. "You can stay here," he called behind her, his voice not angry but lonely. "You could still help me keep them quiet." But Cassidy didn't answer, because she knew now. This town wasn't just a place that had been forgotten. It was designed to erase. Each name written down, each voice left to rot. Not just by the Crestwood, but by men like him. Archivists of silence. And now the stories wanted out. She stepped into the street again. The town had changed. The sky pulsed. The ground hummed. Doors began to creak open on their own, windows groaned, and the air filled with names, spoken softly, whispered through the bones of the buildings. Cassidy opened her recorder, pressed play, and said, "I've found the names that were never meant to be remembered. And now, I'm going to say them all." The wind rose like breath held too long, and the silence began to crack. The wind didn't howl. It whispered. Not like a breeze rustling leaves, but like thousands of voices long buried, rising from the cracks in the town's skin. Cassidy stood at the center of it, holding the 2 ledger books against her chest, the recorder warm in her coat pocket. The moment she had spoken, the world had begun to shift. Not in space, not even in time, but in memory. The buildings seemed to lean closer, listening. Doors unlatched without touch. Streetlights sparked with a soft, mournful glow. And beneath it all, the ground pulsed like a beating heart, steady, slow, waking. Cassidy had heard the sound of silence for years. In ghost stories, in motel rooms, in the hollow between someone's last word and the moment no one came to find them. But this silence was angry. Not loud, just coiled. A silence that had been fed, made strong by generations of forgetting. It didn't want to be broken. It wanted to grow, consume, continue. She stepped into the middle of the intersection, where the town's 4 main streets crossed like veins. The cracked pavement beneath her feet felt thinner now, like a membrane stretched too tight. She knelt and placed the 2 books gently on the ground. Then, with fingers steady and deliberate, she opened them both to their final pages. Her name on one side, Eden's on the other. And she spoke, "You were never lost. You were erased. But I remember." The whispering wind surged around her. Cassidy reached for her recorder and pressed play. At first nothing, then a voice, Eden's, soft, fragile. The recording she'd found in the crestwood, now playing out into the open air. He looked in the mirror, and something looked back. Then he wasn't my dad anymore. Then he wasn't anyone. I stayed. I thought he'd come back. But I think the town kept him. Cassidy let the words hang, then flipped to the next recording. Another voice. A man trembling. "I never meant to stay. I ran out of gas, that's all." Then the sky wouldn't move. The town kept shifting. I couldn't find the road again. I forgot my name first. Then I forgot who I was calling for. Cassidy played another, and another, each voice layered over the last, like a symphony of mourning. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She broadcasted. The names that had been crossed out in red ink were spoken aloud, one by one, their stories unspooling into the sky like smoke from a long, dead fire. With every name, the town shook. Windows burst open. Chimneys cracked. Weeds withered and turned to ash. And from beneath the ground, the silence screamed. The earth split down the middle of Main Street. Not wide, not sudden, a single fault line, as if the town itself had been hiding a mouth, and Cassidy had just taught it how to speak. A voice, low, guttural, not from any throat, rose from the fissure. Stiop. Cassidy looked into the widening crack. There was no fire, no void, just darkness, not emptiness. A darkness full of held back sound of stolen breath, of lives not lived but trapped. She stepped closer. The voice grew louder. "Yo bare suedos tuo lustin. Nautafari." She lowered her head to the edge of the fissure and whispered, "You should have never tried to keep them quiet." The moment the words left her mouth, the ground convulsed. The cracks stretched across buildings, snapping their foundations like dry twigs. The wind blew sideways, carrying with it the sound of hundreds, maybe thousands, of names now free. The town tried to hold itself together, but it was never built for truth. It was a monument to forgetting, a mausoleum of memory sealed in routine, silence, and red ink. Cassidy watched as the buildings collapsed, not into rubble, but into dust. Stories reduced to grain, then swept into the sky like ash in a storm. And when the wind died, there was nothing left, only a flat field where the town had stood, only her, and the books, still intact, still open. She looked down at her name one last time. Cassidy Vale, unknown room, status incomplete. She took out her pen and crossed it out. Then she turned to Eden's name. She didn't cross it. She wrote a single word beside it. Remembered. Cassidy stood slowly, the air still humming around her. The sky was turning orange with sunrise. The town hadn't been destroyed. It had been released, not erased, unhidden. She gathered the books, tucked the recorder into her coat, and began walking toward the horizon. The wind carried faint voices behind her, soft, warm. No longer trapped. They said you did it, and we're not lost anymore. And beneath it all, her own voice, echoing from a place no longer cursed, no longer forgotten. I remember. And this time the silence let her go. The road ahead was empty. No signs, no traffic, no town. Only Cassidy, walking forward with 2 heavy books and a recorder that still ticked softly in her pocket. The wind no longer carried whispers. It carried her. Each step seemed to pull sound and weight from the earth beneath her. The ground didn't resist her. It moved with her, as if the world had finally remembered her name. For so long, she'd chased voices. Now they followed her. She didn't know how long she walked. There was no clock, no horizon line that stayed in one place. Time folded over itself out here. Daylight thickened until it was syrup-colored. Shadows stretching sideways like memories that refused to fade. Cassidy walked through them all, the echoes, the warmth, the afterimage of stories freed. She passed no towns, no ruins, only the suggestion of where places had once been. Like stains pressed into the skin of the world. Ghosts of buildings, murmurs of crowds. But the land was quiet now, grateful. Something had been set right, then she saw it. A single structure far in the distance. Not a motel, not a house, not a church or a store or a grave, just a door, standing alone in the field. No frame, no walls around it, not attached to anything at all, and yet it stood, tall, waiting. Cassidy slowed. The grass around it was flat, dead, shaped in a perfect circle, as if something had been there long ago, then vanished, leaving only this entry point. The door was old, wood cracked with time, brass handle tarnished green, a small peephole black as pitch. There was no sign, no symbol, no name. She stood before it, her shadow long behind her, and felt the weight of everything pressing from the other side. This door was not forgotten. It had never been known. A door that opened for no one. And yet, Cassidy felt it pulling her, not with menace, with meaning. This was the final place. The last space not corrupted by forgetting, because it had never been remembered in the first place. A threshold untouched by names, by mourning, by stories. This door was before memory, and it waited for someone willing to cross without knowing what lay beyond. She placed the books at its base, one for the motel, one for the town. She did not need to carry them anymore. She pressed the recorder into the grass between them, and for the first time she turned it off. No more names, no more voices. They had been heard. Now, silence was no longer a prison. It was a choice. Cassidy reached for the door, touched the handle, and paused. If she opened it, she could never return. There would be no second crossing, no trail of breadcrumbs. This door did not lead backward or forward. It didn't lead anywhere. It simply led out, a place beyond all things spoken, remembered, or mourned. A place where she could finally rest, not in forgetting, but in completion. And then she smiled, not sad, not afraid, just ready. She turned the knob. The door opened with no sound, only light, not blinding, not warm, just whole. She stepped through, and the door, once open for no one, closed gently behind her. The grass stirred once, as if exhaling, and where Cassidy had stood, only wind, only sky, only quiet. But somewhere, deep in the world, in the soil, in the bones of old walls and cracked glass, something remembers. Not just the voices, not just the dead, but her, Cassidy Vale, the one who listened, the one who stayed, the one who said the names out loud. And now, even without her recorder, the echo moves, through motels no longer haunted, through towns rebuilt from memory, through silence no longer feared. Because someone finally told the stories right, and the world, at last, listened.